It can take 10 seconds to damage something you spent 10 years building, 10 seconds to send the message you wish you could pull back, 10 seconds to answer a criticism with a cruelty that does not sound like you until it is already spoken, 10 seconds to buy what you cannot afford because disappointment wants relief, 10 seconds to walk away from someone because pride would rather lose the relationship than tolerate the feeling of being misunderstood, 10 seconds to agree to something you do not want because rejection feels more dangerous than resentment, 10 seconds to let fear make a decision that your clearer mind would never have made. The strange part is that in those moments, the reaction rarely feels like a choice, it feels necessary. Your heart speeds up, your face grows warm. A sentence appears in your mind with the force of a command. Say something, defend yourself, prove them wrong, leave, buy it, call them, do not call them, show them you do not care. Make them understand. Escape before this gets worse, and because the impulse arrives with energy, you confuse energy with truth. You say, I had no choice, I was angry, or I was scared, or that is just how I am. But anger is not a hand that reaches through your body and moves your mouth. Fear is not a judge that signs your decisions. Shame is not a law. Desire is not a contract. An emotion can be powerful without being sovereign. That distinction is where this book begins. Most people imagine that controlling life means gaining control over circumstances, more money, better timing, cooperative people, a predictable future, a body that never becomes tired, a career that never surprises them, a relationship that never touches their insecurity, a world that behaves well enough for them to remain calm. That form of control does not exist. Life keeps moving. People disappoint you. Plans change. Messages arrive at the wrong time. Bodies become exhausted. Markets turn. Friends misunderstand. Strangers provoke. Opportunities disappear. Doors open before you feel ready. Someone says the exact sentence that touches an old wound you thought you had outgrown. If your stability requires all of that to behave, then your stability belongs to all of that. This is the uncomfortable truth hidden inside the title of this book. If you cannot govern what happens inside you when something happens outside you, then the outside world acquires more influence over the direction of your life than it should have. Not absolute influence, not mystical control, but practical influence. A person who can provoke you can affect what you say. A fear you cannot tolerate can affect what you avoid. An insecurity you refuse to examine can affect whom you choose. An impulse you never interrupt can affect what you spend, eat, promise, destroy, postpone, or regret. A need for approval can affect the career you pursue, the boundaries you abandon, the opinions you pretend to hold, and the life you slowly build for an audience that may not even be watching. This is why self-command is not a personality trait reserved for monks, soldiers, philosophers, or unusually disciplined people. It is a daily form of freedom. And freedom begins in a place so small that most people overlook it. There is a moment between impact and action. Sometimes it lasts several seconds. Sometimes it is almost invisible. Sometimes you notice it only after years of practice. But it is there often enough to change a life. A message appears on your phone. Before you answer, there is a moment. Someone interrupts you. Before your voice changes, there is a moment. You feel the urge to quit. Before you close the laptop, there is a moment. You are about to repeat a familiar argument. Before the old sentence leaves your mouth, there is a moment. You feel the need to prove that you are right. Before you turn a disagreement into a battle, there is a moment. That moment is not dramatic, it does not glow, it does not announce itself as destiny. Yet much of what people call character is built there. The Stoic philosophers returned repeatedly to a distinction between what is within our sphere of agency and what is not. Epictetus placed extraordinary emphasis on the judgments we form about events. Marcus Aurelius practiced the difficult work of meeting circumstances without automatically surrendering the mind to them. Seneca examined anger not as a badge of strength, but as a force that can make a person serve the very thing that provoked him. Their language came from another age, but the problem has not changed. We still live among triggers, only now many of them fit in a pocket. A notification can interrupt your concentration, a stranger's opinion can alter your mood, a headline can make your body prepare for a battle that is happening thousands of miles away. A photograph can make your life feel inadequate. A typing bubble can make you invent a future. A delay of 6 minutes can become rejection. A comment can stay in your mind longer than the person who wrote it spent thinking about it. The modern world has become exceptionally good at obtaining reactions. Outrage holds attention. Anxiety keeps people checking. Comparison keeps them scrolling. Urgency shortens reflection. Algorithms do not need to hate you to benefit from your reactivity. They only need to learn what reliably makes you look again. But this book is not about blaming technology, difficult people, childhood, society, or your nervous system. Those things matter. History matters. Circumstances matter. Harm matters. Biology matters. Exhaustion matters. No serious account of self-command can pretend that every reaction is simply a moral failure. The question is different. Given the life you actually have, how much authority can you recover over what happens next? That is the question. Not, how do I stop feeling? Not, how do I become impossible to hurt? Not, how do I control other people? Not, how do I force myself to remain calm every second? But, how do I create enough space inside experience that an emotion can be felt without automatically becoming an instruction? That is a harder kind of strength. A weak form of control says, I must not feel anger. A stronger form says, anger is here, it may contain information. It does not get to choose my words. A weak form says, I must never be afraid. A stronger form says, fear is here, it can warn me. It does not automatically get to choose my direction. A weak form says, I should not care what anyone thinks. A stronger form says, other people's opinions can matter without becoming the constitution of my identity. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to become less governable by temporary states, because the most expensive decisions in life are often not made by the person you are most of the time. They are made by the version of you that appears for 10 minutes when you are humiliated, lonely, tired, frightened, jealous, rejected, intoxicated by praise, desperate for relief, or determined to win. If that temporary version of you has unrestricted access to your mouth, your money, your relationships, your commitments, and your future, then your life is being managed by whoever happens to be sitting in the chair at the moment. The work ahead is to change that. You are going to learn how reactions are built, why emotions can feel like commands, why some triggers seem to possess more authority than others, why suppressing emotion is not the same as mastering it, why the need to react can reveal an unexamined part of identity, and how a deliberate pause can become the beginning of a different life. The goal is not control of life. The goal is control of your participation in it. And if you learn that, something unexpected happens. The world does not become obedient. You become harder to command. The first thing you must control. People usually begin the search for control at the outer edge of their lives. They try to organize the calendar. They try to improve the bank account. They try to find better people, better routines, better environments, better tools, better opportunities, better systems. There is nothing wrong with any of that. External structure matters. A chaotic environment can make good decisions harder. Money can solve real problems. Healthy relationships can change the quality of a life. Planning matters. But there is a reason external improvements sometimes fail to produce internal stability. You can move to a quieter house and carry the same agitation into it. You can leave one relationship and recreate the same argument with another person. You can earn more money and still make decisions from the same insecurity. You can get the promotion and discover that the need to prove yourself has simply moved into a larger office. You can delete one app and find another way to avoid silence. You can build a perfect morning routine and still lose the afternoon because one email touches the exact place in you that has never learned how to be challenged without becoming defensive. The problem is not that external change is useless. The problem is that a person can reorganize the stage while keeping the same actor. And the actor has habits. There is a particular habit that matters more than most. The habit of immediate obedience to internal states. Something happens. You feel. You act. No examination. No interval. No distinction between signal and command. That sequence is so fast that it often disappears from awareness. You experience the action as if the event caused it directly. He insulted me, so I insulted him. She ignored me, so I withdrew. I felt anxious, so I cancelled. I felt lonely, so I contacted the person I had promised myself I would stop contacting. I felt embarrassed, so I lied. I felt uncertain, so I delayed. I felt pressure, so I agreed. Notice the grammar: event, therefore action. The middle has vanished, but the middle is where your life is. Between the event and the action are sensation, memory, interpretation, emotion, expectation, identity, habit, and impulse. Some of these processes happen rapidly. Some are outside immediate awareness, some were trained by repetition, some were shaped by experience long before you had language for them. But the fact that a process is fast does not mean it is destiny. To understand self-command, we need to stop imagining the mind as a king sitting calmly on a throne issuing rational orders. Human beings are not built that way. We are organisms before we are philosophers. We detect threat. We seek reward. We remember pain. We learn associations. We protect belonging. We respond to status. We anticipate loss. We develop habits to reduce the cost of deciding everything from the beginning. Much of this is useful. If you had to consciously calculate every familiar action, ordinary life would become impossible. The problem appears when an old protective pattern keeps issuing instructions in a new situation. A child learns that disagreement produces danger, so the adult says yes when they mean no. A teenager learns that humiliation can be avoided by attacking first, so the adult experiences criticism as a challenge to destroy. A person learns that spending creates temporary relief, so stress quietly becomes a financial habit. Someone is repeatedly abandoned and begins scanning for evidence of departure so intensely that ordinary distance feels like proof. Someone is rewarded for achievement and begins experiencing rest as guilt. Someone is praised for being easy to deal with and becomes unable to disappoint anyone without feeling like a bad person. These patterns are not evidence that a person is defective. They are examples of learning. But what was learned can become costly when it remains unexamined. This is why the first thing you must control is not your life, it is your response. And even that sentence requires precision. Control your response does not mean force yourself to behave perfectly. It does not mean never raise your voice. It does not mean always be calm. It does not mean ignore injustice. It does not mean stay in harmful situations. It does not mean smile while someone violates your boundaries. Sometimes the most deliberate response is confrontation. Sometimes it is leaving. Sometimes it is saying no without explanation. Sometimes it is asking for help. Sometimes it is refusing to continue a conversation. Sometimes it is anger expressed clearly and proportionately. Sometimes it is grief allowed to move through the body instead of being disguised as productivity. Self-command is not the replacement of emotion with politeness. It is the replacement of automaticity with authorship. That word matters, authorship. An author does not control every event that happens in a story. Unexpected things happen. Characters resist. Circumstances change. But authorship means that the next sentence is not written entirely by the last sentence. Your past can explain a reaction without having permanent ownership of it. Your emotion can influence a decision without being the only voice in the room. Your fear can testify without becoming the judge. Your anger can speak without being given the weapon. Your desire can make a case without controlling the verdict. This is the kind of control we will build. The Stoics understood one part of this with unusual clarity. Their central practical distinction was not between people who suffer and people who never suffer. It was between what can be governed and what cannot. Epictetus was severe about the human tendency to demand ownership over what does not belong to our control, while neglecting the judgments and choices that do. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself because philosophy was not an abstract performance for him. It was a repeated act of returning the mind to its proper work. Seneca examined the momentum of anger because he knew that the first movement of emotion and the later decision to feed it are not identical. Modern psychology uses different language. We speak about automatic thoughts, conditioning, cognitive appraisal, habits, emotional regulation, learned responses, avoidance, reinforcement, and patterns of behavior. Carl Jung approached the problem from still another direction, examining the parts of personality that remain unacknowledged and therefore appear indirectly in projection, compulsion, and conflict. James Allen wrote in a moral and philosophical tradition about the relationship between thought, character, and conduct. These traditions are not interchangeable. We will not pretend that they are. But they converge on a practical truth. A life becomes more governable when a person becomes more conscious of the processes that were previously governing them automatically. That is why awareness is not a decorative spiritual concept. It is infrastructure. You cannot interrupt what you cannot notice. You cannot examine an interpretation that you experience as pure reality. You cannot choose a different response if the old one has already become action before you know a choice existed. So the first half of this book will slow the process down. We will examine the moment power is given away. We will look at how a reaction forms before the conscious story catches up. We will separate emotion from instruction. We will explore why certain people and situations seem to possess a private key to your internal state. We will examine the hidden needs beneath reactivity. The need to be right, the need to be admired, the need to be safe, the need to avoid shame, the need to win, the need to be chosen. Then we will turn. We will study the pause, not the theatrical pause of someone trying to appear calm while anger burns underneath. The real pause, the growing ability to remain present long enough for more than one possible action to exist. We will examine boundaries, attention, digital provocation, delayed decisions, disciplined speech, voluntary discomfort, and the relationship between self-respect and restraint. Finally, we will arrive at a different definition of power. Power is not making everyone agree with you. Power is not never being affected. Power is not emotional numbness. Power is not dominance. Power is the capacity to remain sufficiently present under pressure that your values can still participate in your behavior. That capacity can be trained. It will not make you invulnerable. You will still have bad days. You will still react too quickly sometimes. You will still discover old triggers you thought were gone. Exhaustion will narrow your choices. Grief will change your thresholds. Fear will sometimes arrive before philosophy. The goal is not perfection. The goal is recovery. How quickly can you notice that your reaction has taken the wheel? How honestly can you name what is happening? How much damage can you prevent before pride demands that you continue simply because you already began? How often can you create one more second between impulse and action? A life can change through seconds like that. If this kind of work, practical, philosophical, and focused on genuine inner authority, rather than empty motivation, is useful to you, subscribe and stay with the channel. The purpose of this series is not to give you ideas that sound powerful for an hour. It is to build ideas you can return to when the difficult moment actually arrives, because it will arrive. Someone will say the thing, the plan will change, the old fear will wake up, the phone will light up, the urge will appear, and when it does, the question will not be whether you have emotions. The question will be whether the emotion is the only voice allowed to answer. That is the first thing you must control. Chapter 1. The moment you give your power away, there is a simple test for discovering where your power is leaking. Ask yourself, what can reliably change my state without asking my permission? A certain person's silence, a particular tone of voice, a delayed reply, someone else's success, a criticism, a memory, a number in your bank account, a headline, a mistake, a look across a room. First sentence beginning with, "We need to talk." The answer does not tell you that the trigger is evil or that you should become indifferent. It tells you where your internal system has become highly reactive. Most people imagine power as something visible: position, money, strength, authority, influence. But there is another form of power that is far more intimate: the capacity to determine what happens to another person's attention, interpretation, and behavior. If someone can insult you and reliably make you abandon your principles, that person has obtained temporary influence over you. If someone can praise you and reliably make you betray your judgment, they have influence over you. If a fear can make you cancel every opportunity before reality has had a chance to answer, that fear has influence over you. If a craving can repeatedly persuade you to sacrifice tomorrow for 10 minutes of relief, that craving has influence over you. This is not moral condemnation. It is diagnosis. You cannot recover authority from a place you refuse to admit has authority over you. One reason reactivity is difficult to see is that it often disguises itself as strength. Anger can feel strong. Defensiveness can feel strong. Walking away first can feel strong. Having the last word can feel strong. Refusing to apologize can feel strong. Making someone jealous can feel strong. Answering immediately can feel strong. But strength and reactivity are not the same thing. A reaction can be loud and still be controlled by the thing that caused it. Imagine a person who says, "No one disrespects me," and then spends the next 6 hours arguing with a stranger online. The person may feel powerful because they are fighting, but who chose how those 6 hours would be spent? Imagine someone who sees an ex-partner with someone new and immediately posts something designed to provoke jealousy. They may feel in control because they acted first. But who designed the action? The new photograph did. Imagine an employee who receives ordinary feedback and spends the evening constructing an argument for why everyone else is incompetent. The anger may feel like self-respect. But if feedback reliably destroys perspective, then feedback has become a lever. A lever does not need to be large, it only needs the right point of contact. Every person has points of contact. The work is not to become ashamed of them. The work is to locate them. This is where the stoic distinction becomes useful. Epictetus repeatedly directed attention toward the difference between an event and the judgment attached to it. That does not mean events are neutral in every moral sense. Some events are genuinely harmful, some people behave unjustly, some losses are devastating. The point is that the mind participates in experience by interpreting what an event means, what it predicts, and what it demands. Two people can receive the same criticism. One hears, "There is information here, some of it may be useful." The other hears, "I have been exposed, I am being diminished, I must fight." The words may be identical. The internal event is not. Why? Because a trigger does not enter an empty mind. It enters a history. Criticism touches the person who was humiliated. Distance touches the person who was abandoned. Uncertainty touches the person who learned to survive through control. A boundary touches the person who equates love with access. Someone else's confidence touches the person who secretly experiences life as a ranking. The event arrives in the present, but the reaction may have been rehearsed for years. This is why self-command begins with curiosity instead of accusation. When you react strongly, ask a better question than, "What is wrong with me?" Ask, "What did this moment seem to mean?" That question opens the middle. Maybe the delayed message did not merely mean delay, it meant rejection. Maybe the criticism did not merely mean correction, it meant humiliation. Maybe the other person's success did not merely mean they succeeded, it meant you are falling behind. Maybe the disagreement did not merely mean they see things differently, it meant you are losing status. Maybe the request for space did not merely mean someone needs space. It meant you are about to be abandoned. The reaction makes more sense once the meaning is visible. And once the meaning is visible, it can be examined. This is one of the most important moves in the entire book. You do not control an event by examining your interpretation. You recover influence over your participation in the event. That difference protects us from a childish form of self-help in which every problem is reduced to mindset. Some circumstances should be changed, resisted, reported, or escaped. Some people should lose access to you. Some environments are unhealthy. Some problems are material and require material solutions. Inner control is not an excuse for outer passivity. In fact, greater self-command often makes decisive action easier. When you are not spending all your energy proving, panicking, retaliating, and rehearsing, you have more energy for useful movement. You can leave without performing the exit. You can set a boundary without writing a speech designed to punish. You can admit a mistake without collapsing your identity. You can receive criticism without surrendering your self-respect. You can identify manipulation without becoming obsessed with the manipulator. You can be angry and strategic at the same time. That last sentence matters. Many people fear self-control because they think it means becoming weak, passive, or easy to exploit. They imagine that if they do not react immediately, they will be dominated. But immediate reaction is often exactly what makes a person easy to manipulate. If I know what insult will make you lose judgment, I know which button to press. If I know what compliment will make you lower your standards, I know which button to press. If I know that silence makes you chase, silence becomes a tool. If I know that urgency makes you agree, urgency becomes a tool. If I know that guilt makes you surrender boundaries, guilt becomes a tool. The person who cannot tolerate a feeling can often be controlled through that feeling. This is why emotional tolerance is a form of independence. Can you tolerate being misunderstood long enough to decide whether explanation is necessary? Can you tolerate someone's disappointment long enough to keep a reasonable boundary? Can you tolerate uncertainty long enough to avoid inventing a catastrophic future? Can you tolerate the discomfort of not answering immediately? Can you tolerate the possibility that someone does not like you? Can you tolerate the temporary feeling of losing without becoming reckless? Each tolerance closes a door through which unnecessary control used to enter. Marcus Aurelius practiced this repeatedly in his private reflections. He reminded himself that other people would behave according to their nature, and that his task was to govern his own contribution. The point was not to become unaffected by insult or difficulty. It was to avoid adding self-betrayal to the original problem. That is a powerful standard. The event may be painful. Do not make your reaction more expensive than the event. Someone criticizes you. The criticism lasts 30 seconds. Your reaction costs 3 days of sleep. Someone rejects you. The rejection hurts. Your reaction sends you back into a relationship that has already proven destructive. Someone annoys you. The annoyance is small. Your reaction damages trust with a person you love. Someone succeeds. Their success changes nothing about your actual resources. Your reaction turns admiration into bitterness, and bitterness into withdrawal. The original event and the final cost are often different sizes. Self-command is the art of preventing unnecessary multiplication. There is another reason we give power away. We confuse expression with authenticity. If I feel it, I should say it. If I think it, I should be honest. If I hold back, I am being fake. This idea sounds courageous, but it ignores a basic fact. Not every internal event deserves external expression. Authenticity is not the publication of every draft. You can feel jealous without becoming accusatory. You can feel anger without choosing cruelty. You can feel attraction without violating a commitment. You can feel fear without pretending certainty is impossible. You can feel resentment and still ask whether your own unspoken expectations contributed to it. Maturity includes editing, not censorship of the self. Editing. The ability to say, this is real, but it is not ready to become action. That sentence can save relationships. It can save careers. It can save money. It can save dignity. It can save you from the specific humiliation of becoming the person you were trying to defeat. So begin locating the places where your state can be commanded. Do not make a dramatic list. Watch. What changes your breathing? What makes your thoughts speed up? What makes you start rehearsing imaginary conversations? What makes you check the phone? What makes you want to explain too much? What makes you want to disappear? What makes you want to punish? What makes you want immediate relief? Then ask, what does this seem to mean? Behind the reaction, there is usually a meaning. Behind the meaning, there is often a need: safety, belonging, control, respect, certainty, approval, relief, status, love. The need is not the enemy. The problem is when the need becomes so urgent that it can recruit any behavior it wants. That is the moment power is given away. And the first step in taking it back is not force. It is seeing the transaction. Chapter 2. The reaction happens before the story. A reaction often feels instant because much of its preparation happened before the moment arrived. You walk into a meeting. A colleague says, "Can we revisit the numbers from your report?" Before the sentence is finished, your chest tightens. A thought appears. They think I am incompetent. Then another. I knew this would happen. Then a memory. The last time you were corrected publicly. Then a prediction. Everyone will lose confidence in me. Then an impulse, defend, interrupt, explain. By the time you speak, the present moment has become crowded with the past and the future. But if someone asked you why you reacted, you might say, because of what they said. That answer is incomplete. What they said was the trigger. Your system supplied the story. This is not an argument that stories are imaginary or irrelevant. Interpretation is necessary. Human beings cannot live without making meaning. We constantly decide whether something is safe, dangerous, friendly, insulting, promising, boring, urgent, or uncertain. The problem is not interpretation. The problem is invisible interpretation. When you cannot see that you are interpreting, your interpretation feels identical to reality. This is why slowing the sequence matters. A useful map looks like this: trigger, sensation, interpretation, emotion, impulse, action, consequence. Not every reaction follows this order neatly. Human experience is messier than diagrams. Sensation and interpretation can occur together. Emotion can influence interpretation. Habit can compress several stages into one. But the map helps us notice that behavior does not emerge from nowhere. Take the delayed message. Trigger, no reply. Sensation, tight stomach, restless energy. Interpretation, they are losing interest. Emotion, anxiety. Impulse, send another message. Action, follow up repeatedly. Consequence, the other person feels pressured and creates distance. Evidence, see, they always pull away. Now notice what happened. The interpretation helped produce the consequence that seemed to confirm the interpretation. This is one way reactivity becomes self-reinforcing. Or take criticism. Trigger, your manager points out an error. Sensation, heat, tension. Interpretation, I am being disrespected. Emotion, anger and shame. Impulse, counterattack. Action, you point out someone else's mistakes. Consequence, the conversation becomes adversarial. Evidence, this workplace is hostile. Again, the reaction participates in the reality it later describes. This does not mean the manager was right, kind or fair. It means your response becomes one of the causes in the next moment. That is why the reaction matters. A person with no control over interpretation and impulse is not merely experiencing life. They are continually helping create the conditions they later blame entirely on life. That sentence can sound severe, so it needs balance. You are not responsible for everything that happens to you. You are responsible within the limits of your actual agency for what you contribute after it happens. Those are different claims. Confusing them creates either helplessness or self-blame. The first says, nothing is my responsibility. The second says, everything is my fault. Self-command lives between them. It says, this was not chosen by me. My next participation may still be. The earliest stages of reaction are often bodily. You may notice pressure in the chest, tightening in the jaw, a drop in the stomach, a rush of heat, a sensation of shrinking, a sudden need to move, a flood of energy. These reactions can happen before conscious language arrives. That matters because people often try to intervene too late. They wait until they are already constructing the argument, but the body may have announced the reaction earlier. Learning your own signals is practical. Maybe anger begins in your shoulders. Maybe fear begins in your stomach. Maybe shame makes your eyes move away. Maybe you know you are about to people please because your voice becomes unusually agreeable. Maybe you know you are about to make an impulsive purchase because a specific kind of restless excitement appears. Maybe you know you are about to send a destructive message because you start typing faster than you can think. These are not universal rules, they are personal indicators. The purpose of noticing them is not to become hyper-vigilant about every sensation. It is to become familiar enough with your own escalation that you can recognize the beginning before you are trapped in the ending. Seneca understood the importance of momentum in anger. He distinguished between the initial movement of being affected and the later process of giving anger consent and fuel. We do not need to adopt every detail of ancient Stoic psychology to appreciate the practical insight. A first movement is not always a decision. A first thought is not always a belief. A first emotion is not always a command. The mistake is assuming that because the first movement arrived uninvited, everything that follows is also involuntary. Think of a match. The strike is fast, the fire can still be fed or deprived. Someone says something insulting. The first wave arrives. Then the mind begins collecting wood. She always does this. Nobody respects me. I should remind her what she did last year. I knew people cannot be trusted. This is exactly why I never open up. Each sentence can increase the flame. Then we say the anger kept growing, as if growth happened without participation. Sometimes it does grow rapidly. Sometimes the body remains activated. But often we are also rehearsing, imagining, remembering, and prosecuting. We are feeding. This is one reason mental replay is so powerful. An event can happen once in the world and 50 times in the mind. The body responds to each rehearsal. The insult is repeated internally. The facial expression is replayed. The sentence is improved. The comeback becomes sharper. The imaginary jury agrees with you. Hours later, the other person is eating dinner while you are still attending the trial. Who is being punished? This does not mean you should never reflect on conflict. Reflection can be useful, but reflection and rehearsal are different. Reflection asks, what happened? What matters? What should I do? Rehearsal asks the same question, only to produce the same emotion again. One leads toward action or understanding. The other keeps the mind living in an event that has ended. This is why the story matters. The story can extend the life of a trigger. A 5-second event can become a 5-hour state. A 5-hour state can influence decisions unrelated to the original problem. You argue with your partner because of work. You make a purchase because of loneliness. You avoid a friend because of shame from a mistake they know nothing about. You eat for relief, scroll for escape, drink for silence, or attack for control. The reaction migrates. This is how one unexamined trigger can spread across a day. The solution is not endless analysis. You do not need to become a forensic investigator of every feeling. You need enough awareness to ask 3 questions. What happened? What did I make it mean? What am I about to do because of that meaning? Those questions separate event, interpretation, and action. Suppose a friend cancels dinner. What happened? They cancelled. What did I make it mean? They do not value me. What am I about to do because of that meaning? Withdraw, punish, send a cold reply, stop inviting them. Now the reaction is visible. You may still decide the pattern is disrespectful. Maybe they cancel constantly. Maybe a boundary is appropriate. But now you can respond to the pattern instead of blindly acting from the wound. Or suppose you are overlooked for an opportunity. What happened? Someone else was chosen. What did I make it mean? I am behind. I am not good enough. I will never get there. What am I about to do because of that meaning? Quit. Again, the distinction creates options. Maybe you need better skills. Maybe the process was unfair. Maybe the opportunity was not aligned. Maybe the rejection contains useful information. Maybe none of those explanations can be known yet. The point is not forced optimism. The point is refusing to let the first interpretation become the only possible future. Reactive minds crave certainty. They hate me. This will fail. I have ruined everything. I cannot do this. Nothing is going to change. These statements feel powerful because they end ambiguity. Certainty can be emotionally easier than not knowing. Even negative certainty can feel safer than uncertainty. If I decide the relationship is doomed, I no longer need to tolerate the anxiety of waiting. If I decide I am incapable, I no longer need to risk trying. If I decide everyone is selfish, I no longer need to risk trust. If I decide the opportunity is impossible, I no longer need to face the possibility of rejection. Sometimes certainty is not clarity, it is anesthesia. Self-command requires a higher tolerance for unfinished information. I do not know yet. That sentence is psychologically spacious. It prevents the mind from building a prison out of the first available explanation. I do not know why they have not replied yet. I do not know what this setback means yet. I do not know whether this fear is warning me or merely repeating an old pattern. I do not know whether I need to stay, leave, confront, wait, or ask. Not knowing is not weakness. It is sometimes the most accurate position available, and accuracy is more useful than dramatic certainty. When the reaction happens before the story, awareness allows you to catch the story as it forms. You begin to notice the speed with which the mind turns facts into forecasts. You see how quickly a sensation becomes an identity. You hear the internal prosecutor begin the case. You notice the old script reaching for the microphone. At first, this may happen after the reaction, then during, eventually, sometimes, before. That progression is enough. You do not need perfect control, you need earlier recognition. Earlier recognition creates more room. More room creates more choices, and more choices are the beginning of freedom. Chapter 3. Why your emotions feel like commands. Emotions are persuasive. They arrive with a tone of certainty. Fear says, do not go. Anger says, do something now. Shame says, hide. Loneliness says, reach for anyone. Desire says, you need this. Jealousy says, something is being taken from you. Anxiety says, solve the future before it happens. Guilt says, give more even if you have already given enough. The emotional voice rarely introduces itself by saying, here is one possible interpretation of the current situation. It speaks in imperatives. That is why emotions so easily become commands. An emotion is not merely a thought, it is a whole body state. Attention narrows. Certain memories become easier to access. Certain predictions feel more plausible. The meaning of the situation changes. The future seems different from inside fear than it does from inside calm. The same conversation can look insulting at midnight and manageable after sleep. The state alters the world you think you are seeing. This creates a common mistake. People make permanent decisions inside temporary states and then call those decisions authentic. I finally told the truth. Perhaps, or perhaps anger removed every competing consideration and made one truth feel like the only truth. I finally chose myself. Perhaps, or perhaps hurt convinced you that distance was the only form of self-respect available. I followed my heart. Perhaps, or perhaps desire overruled information you had been carefully gathering for months. An emotion can reveal something real while still distorting proportion. That is the discipline required here. Do not dismiss the feeling. Do not worship it. Listen without surrender. This is especially difficult in a culture that alternates between two bad instructions. The first says, suppress your emotions. Be strong. Do not cry. Do not show fear. Do not admit need. Do not let anyone see what affects you. The second says, honor every feeling by acting from it. Speak your truth immediately. Follow what feels right. Never betray your emotions. If it feels wrong, leave. If it feels good, trust it. Both approaches confuse feeling with authority. Suppression treats emotion as an enemy. Impulsivity treats emotion as a ruler. Self-command treats emotion as information. Information matters. If you feel fear when someone becomes aggressive, pay attention. If you repeatedly feel resentment after agreeing to requests, pay attention. If you feel dread every Sunday night before work, pay attention. If you feel small around a certain relationship, pay attention. If jealousy appears, ask what it is protecting. If anger appears, ask what boundary, expectation, wound, or value seems threatened. If sadness appears, ask what has been lost. The emotion may be accurate, exaggerated, inherited, displaced, or mixed, but it is telling you something about the system. The mistake is assuming that the message and the instruction are the same. Imagine a smoke alarm. Its purpose is to alert you. But an alarm is not a complete fire plan. It does not tell you whether the smoke comes from a burning house, a pan on the stove, or a faulty sensor. You still need to assess. Emotions are more complex than alarms, but the metaphor helps. Fear can indicate danger. Fear can also indicate unfamiliarity. Those are not the same. If you treat all fear as danger, growth becomes difficult because every new territory produces some uncertainty. A first public speech may feel threatening. A difficult but necessary conversation may feel threatening. Leaving a familiar but unhealthy pattern may feel threatening. Applying for something larger may feel threatening. Being seen may feel threatening. Saying no may feel threatening. If fear always has veto power, the familiar becomes a prison. This is why courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the refusal to make fear the sole decision-maker. Anger works similarly. Anger can identify violation, unfairness, obstruction, humiliation, frustration, or pain. It can energize action, but anger is poor at proportion. It likes total language, always, never, everyone, no one, everything, nothing. It compresses nuance because nuance slows the attack. When angry, people often retrieve evidence selectively. They remember every offense and forget every repair. They reinterpret neutral actions through the current state. They become unusually certain of another person's motives. This is one reason arguments can feel so conclusive while they are happening and so embarrassing later. The mind inside anger is not necessarily lying. It is editing. It is selecting material that supports the state. Shame has its own command, disappear. Shame does not merely say, I did something wrong. It can say, I am wrong. That shift matters. Guilt can support repair. Shame often attacks identity. A person who feels guilt may apologize. A person consumed by shame may avoid the person entirely, lie, attack, or pretend not to care. Why? Because if the self is the problem, exposure feels dangerous. This is how shame can produce the very behavior that creates more shame. Loneliness also speaks urgently. Loneliness says, connection now. But loneliness does not always care about the quality of connection. This is why people return to relationships they already know are destructive, text someone who repeatedly destabilizes them, tolerate disrespect, or mistake attention for intimacy. The need is real. The solution selected by the state may not be. Desire has similar logic. Desire narrows time. It makes the present reward large and the future cost abstract. Buy now, eat now, reply now, watch one more, stay one more hour, take the shortcut. Tomorrow becomes someone else's problem. Self-command expands time again. It brings the future self back into the room. What will this choice cost tomorrow morning? What will I think about this decision when the state passes? Does this action serve the desire, or does it serve my life? That final distinction is useful. A person can honor a desire without obeying its first suggestion. You may want relief. Relief is legitimate, but the first available relief may create a larger burden. You may want connection. Connection is legitimate, but the first available person may not be safe. You may want respect. Respect is legitimate, but humiliating someone else does not create self-respect. You may want certainty. Certainty is understandable, but inventing an answer is not the same as knowing. The goal is to separate the underlying need from the automatic strategy. This is one of the deepest skills in emotional maturity. Need and strategy are not identical. I need to send this message may actually mean I need reassurance. I need to prove him wrong may actually mean I need to feel that I am not powerless. I need to buy this may actually mean I need a break from disappointment. I need to explain myself again may actually mean I need to believe that being understood determines my worth. I need to leave immediately may actually mean I need temporary distance from an overwhelming state. Once the need is visible, more strategies become available. Reassurance can come from a trusted friend, from waiting for more information, from self-reflection, or from tolerating uncertainty. Power can come from a boundary instead of a battle. Relief can come from sleep, movement, silence, conversation, or a smaller decision. Distance can be temporary instead of destructive. This is how self-command becomes compassionate rather than punitive. You are not saying, my emotions are stupid. You are saying, my emotions deserve better than automatic obedience. That idea may sound strange, but consider it. If anger is telling you that something matters, do you honor anger by exploding in a way that makes the real issue impossible to discuss? If fear is telling you that you feel vulnerable, do you honor fear by allowing it to shrink your world indefinitely? If loneliness is telling you that you need connection, do you honor loneliness by returning to someone who repeatedly makes you feel more alone? If shame is telling you that your sense of belonging is threatened, do you honor shame by hiding from every opportunity to repair? True listening is more demanding than reaction. It asks, what are you trying to protect? Then, is the action you are demanding actually protective? This question changes emotional life. Anger may demand attack, but protection may require clarity. Fear may demand retreat, but protection may require preparation. Shame may demand hiding, but protection may require confession and repair. Jealousy may demand control, but protection may require an honest conversation about insecurity and boundaries. Anxiety may demand endless checking, but protection may require a plan and then disengagement. The emotion is heard. The command is reviewed. This is mental sovereignty in practice. There is another reason feelings become commands. They alter identity. In anger, you may become the person who has been disrespected. In fear, the person in danger. In shame, the person who has failed. In jealousy, the person who is losing. In rejection, the person who was not chosen. When identity fuses with emotion, behavior becomes easier to justify. Of course I attacked. I was the one being disrespected. Of course I withdrew. I was the one being rejected. Of course I gave up. I was the one who failed. The language closes the system. A more spacious sentence is available. I am a person experiencing anger. I am a person experiencing fear. I am a person experiencing shame. I am a person experiencing rejection. That small grammatical shift restores a distinction between self and state. The state is real. It is not the whole self. This is not wordplay. It is a reminder that no temporary condition deserves permanent ownership of identity. You have been angry before and stopped being angry. You have been afraid before and later felt capable. You have been certain before and later changed your mind. States move. Do not hand them permanent authority while they are passing through. You will not always succeed. Some emotions arrive with overwhelming force. Some situations are genuinely dangerous. Some histories make particular states harder to regulate. There is no virtue in pretending otherwise. But even imperfectly, you can practice one question. What is this feeling asking me to do? Then another. Does it have the right to decide? Those two questions create distance without denial, and distance is where choice begins. Chapter 4. The Stoic Secret of Inner Command. The Stoics are often misunderstood because fragments of their philosophy have been turned into slogans. Do not care. Be emotionless. Control what you can. Ignore everyone. That is not the most useful reading. Stoicism was not a performance of hardness. It was a discipline of judgment. Its central practical concern was simple and severe. Human beings suffer unnecessarily when they demand control over what is not theirs to command and neglect what actually belongs to their sphere of agency. This distinction is easy to admire and difficult to live. You cannot control whether someone understands you. You can control whether you speak clearly. You cannot control whether an application is accepted. You can control whether you prepare honestly. You cannot control whether someone keeps a promise. You can control what access repeated broken promises continue to receive. You cannot control whether the market rises tomorrow. You can control whether panic decides your entire strategy. You cannot control whether people speak about you. You can control whether every rumor becomes a summons. You cannot control the existence of pain. You can influence what pain recruits you to do. The Stoic secret is not that external events do not matter. The secret is that there is a second layer of captivity created when we insist that external events must obey us before we can govern ourselves. That bargain makes peace impossible. I will be calm when they stop provoking me. I will be confident when everyone respects me. I will be disciplined when life becomes less stressful. I will be happy when uncertainty disappears. I will speak honestly when no one can reject me. I will rest when there is nothing left to do. The condition is impossible, so the virtue is permanently postponed. Epictetus challenged this structure directly. His philosophy begins by sorting experience into categories, what depends on us and what does not. The exact boundaries can be debated, and modern life is more complex than any simple list. But the practical exercise remains powerful. Ask of a problem, what part of this is mine? Not who caused it, not who deserves blame, not what should have happened, what part is mine now? Suppose someone lies about you. Their lie is not yours. Your decision about whether to respond is yours. Your tone is yours. Your evidence is yours. Your decision to involve the appropriate people is yours. Your refusal to spend 3 days mentally arguing with an imaginary audience is increasingly yours. Suppose a relationship ends. The other person's choice may not be yours. Your grief is not a moral failure. Your memories will arise. But whether you repeatedly monitor their life, whether you abandon your routines, whether you turn pain into humiliation, whether you use the ending as proof that you are unlovable, those processes can gradually become areas of work. The Stoic move is not to deny the wound. It is to stop offering the wound additional territory. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in an especially revealing way because his writings were private reminders, not public lectures. He wrote to himself as someone who needed correction. That matters. Philosophy was not a trophy. It was maintenance. He reminded himself that difficult people would exist. He reminded himself that his own irritation did not improve their character. He reminded himself that the mind adds judgments to events. He returned, repeatedly, to the task of governing his own contribution. This repetitive quality is important because self-command is not achieved by understanding one brilliant idea. You will forget. You will wake up tired. You will be caught by surprise. You will know better and still react. The work is return. Return to the distinction. Return to what is yours. Return to the next choice. This is more useful than trying to become a permanently enlightened version of yourself who never loses perspective. The fantasy of permanent mastery creates shame. The practice of return creates skill. Seneca adds another dimension through his analysis of anger. Anger loves moral permission. It rarely says, "I am losing control." It says, "I am justified." That word can become dangerous. Being justified in feeling anger does not justify every action anger proposes. A person may have every reason to be angry and still make the situation worse through what they do next. The distinction is crucial. Right emotion, wrong strategy. You can be correct about the offense and destructive in the response. This is one reason self-command requires more than asking, "Am I right?" You also need to ask, what does this action produce? Suppose someone behaves unfairly at work. You are right to object, but there are many forms of objection. Document the pattern. Speak directly. Escalate appropriately. Seek advice. Set a boundary. Leave if necessary, or explode in a meeting and provide the other person with evidence against you. Same grievance, different command. The mature question is not merely whether your emotion has a valid cause. It is whether your response serves the value the emotion is defending. If anger defends dignity, does the response preserve dignity? If fear defends safety, does the response create safety? If grief defends attachment, does the response honor what was loved? If guilt defends moral responsibility, does the response repair what can be repaired? Emotion becomes intelligent when it is placed in service of principle. This leads to one of the strongest ideas in Stoic practice. Character must not be outsourced to circumstance. If you are only patient with easy people, patience does not belong to you yet. If you are only honest when honesty costs nothing, honesty is conditional. If you are only disciplined when motivated, motivation is in charge. If you are only calm when nothing is wrong, calm has not been tested. This does not mean seeking suffering for its own sake. It means recognizing that virtues are revealed under pressure. A boundary is easiest before guilt arrives. Discipline is easiest before fatigue. Courage is easiest before fear. Self-command becomes meaningful precisely because the competing state is present. The moment of conflict is not evidence that the practice has failed. It is the practice. You are not practicing patience when no one tests it. You are not practicing restraint when there is no impulse. You are not practicing courage when there is no risk. You are not practicing independent judgment when everyone agrees. The difficult moment is not an interruption of the work. It is where the work becomes visible. This perspective changes the way you interpret triggers. Instead of seeing every provocation as theft, you can sometimes see it as training. Not every insult deserves gratitude. Not every hardship is secretly good. That kind of forced positivity is another refusal to see reality. But a difficult event can still become useful because of the capacity it asks you to develop. A rude person gives you an opportunity to practice not becoming rude. A delayed result gives you an opportunity to practice uncertainty. A disagreement gives you an opportunity to practice clarity without contempt. A mistake gives you an opportunity to practice correction without self-destruction. A temptation gives you an opportunity to discover whether your values are stronger than your mood. the event remains what it is. Your participation changes what it becomes in you. This is where the Stoic idea becomes deeply modern. We live in an environment built to compete for reaction. The incentive structure of many platforms rewards emotional intensity. Outrage is memorable. Fear is sticky. Certainty travels faster than nuance. Public performance rewards speed. The person who pauses can appear weak beside the person who declares. But the old distinction still applies. You cannot control the existence of provocation. You can decide whether your mind becomes free labor for it. You cannot control whether someone posts something designed to make you angry. You can decide whether they receive your afternoon. You cannot control whether a trend tells you that you are behind. You can decide whether comparison becomes a business plan. You cannot control every notification. You can control whether the phone has unrestricted access to your attention. This is not withdrawal from the world. It is selective participation. There is a difference between being informed and being continuously agitated. There is a difference between caring and compulsively checking. There is a difference between engagement and capture. Inner command allows you to make those distinctions. The Stoics also remind us that reputation is a dangerous object of control. If your identity depends on how every person interprets you, then every person becomes a potential manager. You will explain too much, defend too much, perform too much, monitor too much, adjust too much. The desire to control reputation produces a life controlled by reputation. This is a paradox worth remembering. The more desperately you try to control what cannot be controlled, the more it controls you. The more desperately you try to make everyone approve, the more approval governs your decisions. The more desperately you try to eliminate uncertainty, the more uncertainty structures your behavior. The more desperately you try to avoid discomfort, the smaller your life becomes. Freedom requires giving up false control, not because nothing matters, because some things matter so much that you cannot afford to spend your authority on what will never obey you. There is a further consequence of this distinction that is easy to miss. When you stop demanding control over the uncontrollable, you do not become less ambitious, you become more efficient. A large amount of human energy is spent trying to force outcomes through worry. Worry can feel like preparation because the mind is active. But activity is not always action. You can think about an interview for 6 hours and prepare for it for 20 minutes. You can worry about a relationship for 3 days and ask one honest question in 30 seconds. You can monitor a problem continuously and still avoid the decision that would actually address it. The Stoic discipline asks the mind to convert concern into its proper form. If action is possible, act. If preparation is possible, prepare. If communication is necessary, communicate. If no useful action exists now, continuing to agitate the mind is not additional responsibility. This is difficult because worry creates the sensation of involvement. To stop worrying can feel like not caring. But care and worry are not identical. A parent can care deeply while recognizing that an adult child must make their own decision. A leader can care about an outcome while accepting that other people still have agency. A creator can care about reception while accepting that the audience cannot be commanded. An investor can care about risk while recognizing that uncertainty cannot be eliminated. The ability to stop at the edge of one's actual agency is a discipline. It protects action from being drowned in fantasy. There is also a Stoic relationship to rehearsal. The ancient writers sometimes reflected in advance on difficulty, loss, inconvenience, or opposition. The purpose was not to become pessimistic, it was to prevent surprise from acquiring unnecessary power. A modern version is simple. Before a difficult conversation, ask, what if they disagree? What if they become defensive? What if I do not get the apology? What if I need to end the conversation without resolution? Then decide what values still belong to you in each case. Before an important presentation, what if I forget a point? What if someone challenges me? What if I feel nervous? What can I still do? Preparation reduces the fantasy that good performance requires perfect conditions. You become less fragile because you have already imagined imperfection without catastrophe. This is not rehearsing disaster endlessly. It is rehearsing your response once so that difficulty no longer appears as an impossible surprise. Inner command improves when the mind discovers Even if that happens, I still have a next move. That sentence restores scale. The world can remove an outcome. It cannot automatically remove every response. And as long as some response remains, some agency remains. This is the stoic secret of inner command. Separate the domains. Act strongly where action belongs. Release where ownership is impossible. Return to your part, again and again. You do not need the world to become easier before you practice. The next difficult moment is enough. Chapter 5. The invisible need to react. Most reactions protect something. The protection may be wise, it may be outdated, it may be exaggerated, it may be protecting an image rather than a life. But underneath the impulse to react, there is often a need that feels urgent. To be respected, to be right, to be chosen, to be safe, to be seen, to be innocent, to be admired, to avoid shame, to avoid helplessness, to avoid the feeling that someone else has power. These needs are not always conscious. That is why the reaction can appear disproportionate. A person receives a small correction and experiences a large wave of anger. A partner asks for an evening alone and the other person experiences panic. A friend succeeds and envy appears with surprising force. A stranger disagrees online and suddenly the disagreement feels personal. The event may be small. The meaning is large. Carl Jung's work is useful here because he paid attention to the parts of personality that people prefer not to recognize in themselves. He used the language of the shadow for aspects of the self that are disowned, rejected, or kept outside the preferred identity. You do not need to accept every Jungian concept to notice the practical phenomenon. People are often most reactive where their self-image is most fragile. The person who must see himself as intelligent may react intensely to correction. The person who must see herself as generous may become furious when accused of selfishness. The person who must see himself as strong may experience ordinary vulnerability as humiliation. The person who must see herself as independent may deny legitimate needs until they emerge as resentment. The person who must see himself as calm may become quietly controlling because open anger would violate the identity. The stronger the need to preserve an image, the easier it becomes to provoke the person by threatening the image. This is why self-knowledge reduces manipulability. If I can admit that I want approval, approval loses some of its secret leverage. If I can admit that I am jealous, jealousy becomes something I can examine instead of a truth I must defend. If I can admit that criticism scares me, I no longer need to disguise fear as contempt. If I can admit that I want to win, I can notice when winning begins to matter more than the relationship. The part that is acknowledged becomes easier to govern. The part that must remain hidden tends to govern indirectly. Consider the need to be right. On the surface, it sounds intellectual. I care about truth. Sometimes that is true, but if truth were the only concern, being corrected would be useful. New information would improve the map. The need to be right becomes reactive when correction feels like a loss of status. Then the conversation changes. You stop asking what is true. You start asking, how do I avoid losing? Evidence becomes ammunition. Questions become traps. Listening becomes waiting for your turn. The other person's concession becomes more important than the actual issue. At that point, the argument is no longer about the subject. It is about identity. This is why some of the most exhausting conflicts continue long after both people have forgotten what started them. The hidden question is not what happened. It is who is above whom. The need for status has entered the room. The need to be chosen can be equally powerful. Person may say, I just want clarity. But beneath the demand for clarity may be terror of not being selected. So they chase, they over-explain, they negotiate against their own standards. They interpret mixed attention as possibility because accepting disinterest feels like accepting personal inadequacy. Again, the need is understandable. Belonging matters, attachment matters. But when the need to be chosen becomes stronger than the ability to choose, self-respect erodes. You begin auditioning for access to people you have not decided are good for you. That is a loss of command. The need to avoid shame creates another pattern. Shame does not merely want to correct a mistake. It wants to escape exposure. A person who feels ashamed may deny what is obvious, blame someone else, attack the person who noticed, or disappear before accountability becomes possible. From outside, the reaction may look arrogant. Inside, it may be terrified. This is why direct confrontation with reactive behavior sometimes makes it worse. If the behavior is protecting against shame, more humiliation produces more defense. Self-command requires a different move. Can you experience the pain of being wrong without converting it into the terror of being worthless? Can you say, "I did something I regret," without turning the sentence into, "I am irredeemable"? Can you apologize without demanding immediate forgiveness? Can you repair without performing self-hatred? These are forms of strength. They require more stability than denial. The need to feel powerful also drives reaction. Helplessness is deeply uncomfortable. When people cannot control an event, they sometimes create an action simply to stop feeling passive. They send the message, they make the threat, they quit dramatically, they spend money, they post publicly, they demand an answer now. The action may not improve the situation, but it creates movement. Movement feels like power. This is why impulsive action can be addictive. It converts uncertainty into activity. Even destructive activity can feel better than waiting. But movement is not the same as agency. Agency includes the capacity not to move when movement would make things worse. That is harder. To wait without collapsing, to gather information, to let the emotional wave pass, to refuse the false relief of immediate action. This is where the invisible need becomes visible. Ask, what feeling am I trying not to feel? That question reaches deeper than, why am I angry? Maybe the anger is protecting humiliation. Maybe the sarcasm is protecting insecurity. Maybe the withdrawal is protecting fear of rejection. Maybe the need to control is protecting uncertainty. Maybe the constant explanation is protecting the fear of being misunderstood. Maybe the perfectionism is protecting the fear of being ordinary. Maybe the resentment is protecting the inability to say no. The point is not to psychoanalyze yourself endlessly. The point is to find the lever. A reaction becomes easier to interrupt when you know what it is trying to obtain. Suppose you feel the urge to send a long defensive message. What do you want to be understood? Good. Is the message likely to create understanding? Maybe. Maybe not. Would waiting 1 hour improve the chances? Would 3 sentences be clearer than 30? Could you ask a question instead of making a case? Once the need is separated from the strategy, intelligence returns. Suppose you feel jealous. What do you want? Security. Can controlling another person's behavior create lasting security? Probably not. Can an honest conversation help? Can clearer agreements help? Can you examine whether the relationship is actually trustworthy? Can you work on the part of you that equates another person's freedom with your disappearance? The reaction says control. The need says security. Those are not the same. Suppose you want to win an argument. What do you want? Respect. Will humiliating the other person create respect? Maybe fear, maybe resentment, maybe silence, but not necessarily respect. The reaction is solving the wrong problem. This is one of the most common features of automatic behavior. The strategy is immediate. The need is deeper. When you respond only to the strategy, you remain trapped in repetition. When you identify the need, more options appear. There is another hidden need that deserves attention. The need to maintain a coherent story about yourself. Human beings prefer identities that make sense. I am the responsible one. I am the strong one. I am the victim. I am the helper. I am the rebel. I am the one who never needs anyone. I am the one people take advantage of. I am the one who always gets left. A story can organize experience. It can also trap it. If your identity requires you to be the one who is always mistreated, evidence of someone treating you well can feel strangely uncomfortable. You may distrust it, test it, or ignore it. If your identity requires you to be the helper, receiving help can feel like weakness. If your identity requires you to be independent, asking can feel humiliating. If your identity requires you to be exceptional, ordinary learning can feel unbearable because beginners are not exceptional. Reactivity often protects the story. The story says, "This is who I am." Then life presents contradictory evidence. The reaction attempts to restore coherence. This is why growth can feel threatening even when it is positive. A new response creates a new identity. The first time you say no without over-explaining, part of you may feel guilty. The first time you allow someone to misunderstand you, part of you may feel irresponsible. The first time you receive criticism without fighting, part of you may feel weak. The first time you ask for help, part of you may feel exposed. The discomfort does not always mean the new behavior is wrong. Sometimes it means the old identity is losing monopoly. This is where the invisible need to react becomes a doorway. Instead of asking only, how do I stop this behavior? Ask, what identity would I have to release if I stopped? If I stopped chasing, who would I be? If I stopped proving, who would I be? If I stopped rescuing, who would I be? If I stopped fighting every criticism, who would I be? If I stopped making fear responsible for my choices, who would I be? These questions are unsettling because they expose the deeper bargain. Sometimes the reaction is not protecting you from the event. It is protecting you from becoming someone unfamiliar. That is why self-command is not merely behavioral. It is existential. You are learning to tolerate the temporary instability that appears when an old identity is no longer allowed to make every decision. This is also why compassion matters. You cannot bully yourself into stable self-command. If every reactive moment becomes proof that you are weak, you create more shame, and shame creates more reaction. A better response is precise. I see what happened. I see what I was trying to protect. I see what this reaction cost. I can practice a different strategy. No drama, no self-exoneration, no self-destruction, accountability without contempt. That is a mature posture. You do not excuse the reaction. You understand its function well enough to replace it, because the invisible need is rarely solved by the reaction that first appears. Respect is not created by rage. Safety is not created by total control. Belonging is not created by self-abandonment. Power is not created by impulsivity. Dignity is not created by punishment. And freedom is not created by obeying every internal demand. The need deserves attention. The command deserves review. Chapter 6. Your triggers are showing you something. People often speak about triggers as if the goal were to eliminate them. Avoid the person, avoid the topic, avoid the memory, avoid the place, avoid the feeling. Sometimes avoidance is wise. A person does not need to repeatedly expose themselves to harmful situations in order to prove strength. Boundaries are real. Distance can be protective. Safety matters. But not every trigger can or should be removed. Some triggers are embedded in ordinary life. Being corrected, waiting, being misunderstood, watching someone else succeed, hearing no, feeling uncertain, needing help, receiving less attention than expected, making a mistake, having someone disagree. If your only strategy is avoidance, your world may become smaller, while your sensitivity remains untouched. This is why triggers can be useful information. They show you where meaning has become concentrated. A trigger is not necessarily proof that the outside event is dangerous. It is proof that the event has contact with something important inside you. The question is, what? Suppose another person's success triggers you. The easy interpretation is jealousy. But jealousy is not an explanation. What does their success seem to say about you? Maybe it says you are late. Maybe it says opportunities are scarce. Maybe it says there will not be enough recognition left for you. Maybe it reminds you of a dream you abandoned. Maybe it exposes how badly you want something you have been pretending not to care about. The trigger contains information. If you only attack the successful person, you lose the information. If you only shame yourself for jealousy, you lose the information. If you examine the reaction, you may discover desire, and desire can become direction. This is one of the most productive transformations possible. Envy can sometimes be converted into data. What specifically do you envy? Freedom, skill, recognition, money, courage, beauty, discipline, connection? The answer can reveal a neglected value. You do not need to become the other person. You need to understand what their life awakened in you. The same is true of criticism. Why does one criticism disappear while another stays for days? Usually because the second one touches a question you already carry. If someone accuses you of something you know is absurd, you may dismiss it. If they say something you secretly fear might be true, the reaction is stronger. This does not prove the criticism is correct. It proves the subject is alive. A trigger can point toward an unresolved uncertainty. This is why immediate defense can be expensive. Defense ends inquiry. What if there is 5% truth here? That question is uncomfortable. It is also powerful. You do not need to accept the entire accusation. You can extract the useful part without swallowing the distortion. Maybe the criticism is unfair in tone but accurate in one detail. Maybe the person is wrong about your motive but right about the impact. Maybe the feedback is mostly projection but still reveals how your behavior is being perceived. Self-command allows selective learning. Without it, criticism becomes all or nothing. Either I am completely wrong or they are completely wrong. Both positions protect identity. Neither guarantees truth. Triggers around rejection are especially revealing. A person says no. An invitation is declined. A romantic interest becomes distant. A client chooses someone else. A group does not include you. The event is real. But the trigger often adds a second sentence. No one chooses me. I am forgettable. I am behind. I am not enough. This always happens. Now the present event has become evidence in a much larger trial. One rejection is carrying the weight of every rejection. This is where triggers collapse time. The body is in the present. The reaction includes the archive. The current person becomes every person. The current mistake becomes every mistake. The current delay becomes every abandonment. The current uncertainty becomes every period of instability. When this happens, your response is no longer proportionate to the present, because the present is not the only thing being answered. This is not irrational in the sense of meaningless. It is associative. The mind recognizes patterns, but pattern recognition can overreach. A face resembles another face. A tone resembles another tone. A situation resembles another situation. The system prepares for the old outcome. Self-command requires the ability to say, "This reminds me of something. It is not automatically the same thing." That sentence can change relationships. Imagine someone who grew up around unpredictable anger. As an adult, a partner raises their voice slightly during a disagreement. The body responds strongly. The partner may not be dangerous, but the reaction is not only about volume, it is about what volume once predicted. A compassionate response does not say, "You are overreacting." A disciplined response says, "My system is reading this through history. I need enough space to determine what is happening now." That is not denial, it is differentiation. Past and present are related. They are not identical. Triggers also reveal where boundaries are weak. Resentment is a good example. People often experience resentment as proof that others are taking too much. Sometimes they are. But resentment can also reveal that you repeatedly agreed to things you did not want to do. You said yes. You hoped the other person would somehow know the yes was not real. They accepted the yes. You became angry. The trigger is now their request. But the deeper issue may be your difficulty saying no. This is why resentment can be instructive. Ask, what boundary did I expect someone else to invent for me? That question is not always fair. Some people violate clear boundaries. But when the pattern is chronic overgiving followed by silent resentment, the question matters. A trigger can show you where you are outsourcing self-protection. Similarly, irritation can reveal where expectations are unspoken. You expected a friend to call. You expected your partner to notice. You expected your colleague to know. You expected your family to understand. The expectation was never communicated. When reality fails to meet it, the reaction feels like betrayal. Again, the feeling may contain truth, but the trigger asks for examination. Was there an agreement? Was there a request? Was the expectation reasonable? Did the other person know? Could I communicate more clearly instead of collecting evidence that nobody cares? This is not an argument for reducing every problem to communication. Some people know exactly what they are doing. Some patterns are disrespectful. Some relationships are not safe. The point is that triggers are diagnostic, not definitive. They tell you where to look. They do not automatically tell you what you will find. This distinction prevents another common mistake, turning self-awareness into self-blame. If a person triggers you, that does not mean the problem is all inside you. If a behavior hurts you, That does not mean you should simply regulate better and tolerate it. Self-command should increase your ability to recognize reality, not decrease it. A regulated person can often see more clearly. They can distinguish discomfort from danger. They can distinguish one mistake from a pattern. They can distinguish a boundary from punishment. They can distinguish accountability from humiliation. They can distinguish incompatibility from rejection. They can distinguish someone else's limitation from their own worth. This clarity produces better action. One of the most useful trigger practices is simple. When the reaction is strong, complete 3 sentences. This situation is making me feel. This situation seems to mean. What I am tempted to do is. Then add a 4th. What else could be true? That final question is not forced positivity. It is cognitive freedom. Maybe they are not ignoring you. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they are ignoring you. If so, you can still decide what that means for access. Maybe the criticism is unfair. Maybe there is a useful part. Maybe the opportunity is lost. Maybe it is one lost opportunity, not proof about your future. Maybe the fear is accurate. Maybe it is old. Maybe the relationship is ending. Maybe it is changing. Maybe you do not know yet. What else could be true prevents the first story from becoming a dictatorship. You can also ask, what is this trigger trying to teach me about my values? A strong reaction often sits near something valued. Anger near fairness, fear near safety, jealousy near desire, grief near love, resentment near boundaries, shame near belonging. The emotion can point toward the value. Then you can ask how to serve the value more intelligently. If fairness matters, what response increases fairness? If safety matters, what response creates actual safety? If love matters, what response protects love without erasing the self? If dignity matters, what response is dignified? If belonging matters, what response creates genuine belonging rather than performance? This is how triggers become teachers without being romanticized. You do not need to thank every painful experience. You do not need to call every wound a gift. You simply refuse to waste the information. There is one more layer. Some triggers reveal not what you fear, but what you have not permitted yourself to become. Confidence in others may irritate you because you have forbidden your own confidence. Rest in others may irritate you because you equate worth with exhaustion. Directness in others may irritate you because you have trained yourself to be agreeable. Visibility in others may irritate you because you have made smallness a moral virtue. This is where Jung's shadow becomes especially useful as a metaphor. What we reject in others can sometimes contain a quality we have disowned in ourselves, not always. Sometimes a rude person is simply rude, but the question is worth asking. What does this person permit themselves to be that I do not permit in myself? Maybe the answer is selfishness. Good, you do not need more selfishness. But maybe the quality beneath it is boundary. Maybe the person you call arrogant is actually comfortable being visible. Maybe the person you call cold is willing to disappoint others. Maybe the person you call obsessive is disciplined in a way you secretly want. The trigger can contain distorted admiration. Again, information. The goal is not to become triggerless. That fantasy produces fragility. The goal is to become increasingly able to experience a trigger without handing it the entire steering wheel. A trigger says, look here. Self-command says, I will look. I will decide what follows. Chapter 7. The pause that changes everything. There is a moment in self-command that looks unimpressive from the outside. Nothing happens. A message arrives. You do not answer yet. A criticism lands. You do not defend yet. An urge appears. You do not obey yet. The silence can look passive. It is not. The pause is active space. It is the place where one possible future becomes several. Before the pause, the reaction feels inevitable. After the pause, the reaction becomes an option. That is a profound change. People often imagine discipline as force, clenching the jaw, overpowering desire, pushing harder, dominating the self. Sometimes effort is necessary. But the most transferable form of discipline often begins earlier than force. It begins by interrupting momentum. Once a reaction gains speed, resisting it becomes harder. The angry message is half written. The argument is already public. The purchase is already in the cart. The phone is already in your hand. The old contact is already open. The accusation has already started. Now stopping feels like losing. This is why the pause matters before escalation. A pause is not always long. Sometimes it is one breath, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes one night. Sometimes the right pause is 24 hours before making a decision that will affect the next 5 years. The length depends on the stakes and the state. The principle is the same. Do not make a permanent choice at the exact moment your perspective is most narrowed. This is not cowardice. It is respect for context. When the body is highly activated, the mind often becomes more certain and less nuanced. You see fewer options, you predict faster. You hear threat more easily. You want resolution. That is precisely when delay can restore intelligence. You are not refusing to act. You are refusing to let urgency choose the form of action. There is a useful sentence. I do not have to decide this in the state I am in. That sentence can be used for arguments, for purchases, for breakups, for resignations, for public responses, for promises, for confessions, for revenge, for any moment in which the desire for immediate relief may create delayed pain. The pause also helps because emotions have a rhythm. They rise, they peak, they shift. They may return. You do not need to wait until you feel nothing. You need enough change that the state is no longer the only available perspective. A person may still be angry after an hour, but the difference between anger at full velocity and anger with some reflective distance can be enormous. The goal is not emotional elimination. It is emotional deceleration. One of the simplest tools is physical interruption. Stand up, put the phone down, move to another room, take a walk, drink water, wash your face, step outside. Do not treat these actions as magic. They do not solve the problem. They change the context in which the problem is being processed. A body that remains frozen in the argument often keeps rehearsing the argument. Movement can create separation. So can changing the object of attention. Look at the actual room. Name what is physically present. Return from the imaginary courtroom to the chair beneath you. Again, this is not a clinical treatment. It is a practical way of reminding the mind that the event and the story are not the same size. Language can also create a pause. Instead of saying, "You always do this," try, "I am too activated to talk clearly right now." Instead of saying, "Fine, I will do it," try, "Let me think about that and get back to you." Instead of saying, "I quit," try, "I need one night before I decide what I want to do." Instead of sending the paragraph, save it. Instead of buying, leave the item in the cart. Instead of agreeing, say, "I need to check." These sentences are small barriers between impulse and consequence. They are practical architecture for self-command. People who struggle with boundaries often need pauses because their automatic response is social. They say yes before they know what they feel. Then resentment arrives later. The pause allows the internal answer to catch up with the external one. "Can I let you know tomorrow?" That sentence is not indecision. It is time for consent to become real. Likewise, people who react through anger may need a rule. No important message while the body is in escalation. Not because anger is invalid, because anger writes as if the future does not exist. A message written in rage often tries to solve the present feeling by creating a future problem. The pause invites the future back in. What will this sentence do after I stop being angry? Will I still stand behind it? Is this honest or merely sharp? Am I trying to communicate or injure? What result am I actually seeking? These questions are difficult in the first seconds of activation. That is why you do not wait for the perfect question. You build the pause first, then the questions become possible. There is another kind of pause, the pause before interpretation. Someone does not reply. Before they are rejecting me, pause. A friend seems distant. Before they do not care, pause. A manager asks for a meeting. Before I am in trouble, pause. A partner looks upset. Before this is about me, pause. The pause does not forbid interpretation. It delays certainty. That delay prevents many unnecessary reactions. A useful practice is to separate fact from story. Fact: the message has not been answered for 6 hours. Story: they are losing interest. Fact: my manager asked to speak tomorrow. Story: I am about to be fired. Fact: my partner is quiet. Story: I did something wrong. Fact, someone disagreed with me. Story, they do not respect me. The story may turn out to be true. The point is not to insist that it is false. The point is to prevent speculation from being treated as confirmed reality. That is the pause of interpretation. Then there is the pause before self-judgment. You make a mistake. The old mind immediately says, I always ruin things. Pause. What happened? One mistake happened. What does repair require? This shift prevents an error from becoming identity. A mistake can be corrected. An identity verdict creates paralysis. The pause keeps the event specific. There is also a pause before pleasure. This matters because self-command is not only tested by negative emotion. Praise can control you. Excitement can control you. Opportunity can control you. Attraction can control you. The promise of status can control you. Someone offers something flattering. You want to say yes immediately. Pause. Does this align with what I actually want? A new purchase feels like a new identity. Pause. Will I value the object when the fantasy disappears? Someone gives you intense attention. Pause. What do I know about their character? A business opportunity promises speed. Pause. What are the terms? Positive emotion narrows judgment differently from fear, but it can narrow it. The ability to pause before pleasure is one of the least discussed forms of discipline. You are not trying to remove joy. You are protecting joy from becoming recklessness. The pause can also protect relationships from the demand for immediate resolution. Not every conflict should be solved in the same hour it begins. Some conversations improve after both people have time to think. This requires trust because waiting can feel dangerous. The reactive mind says, fix it now or everything is ending. But forcing resolution before either person has clarity often produces agreements that do not hold. A pause can be relationally respectful. I care about this enough not to answer carelessly. That is different from silent punishment. The difference is communication. A healthy pause is named when necessary. I need an hour. I want to continue this conversation tomorrow. I am not disappearing. I am trying not to say something I do not mean. Self-command does not use silence as a weapon. It uses silence as a workshop. This is where the pause becomes more than restraint. It becomes authorship. During the pause you can ask, what am I feeling? What story am I telling? What do I want? What outcome do I actually care about? What response would I respect tomorrow? What value do I want to represent here? That last question is especially powerful. What value do I want to represent here? Not, what do I feel like doing? Not, what would make the other person hurt? Not, what would make me look powerful? What value, clarity, courage, respect, honesty, boundary, patience, self-respect, compassion, justice? Once the value is named, action can organize around it. Suppose someone insults you publicly. Emotion, anger, story. I am being diminished. Impulse. Humiliate them. Value. Dignity. Now ask, what does dignity do? Maybe it responds directly. Maybe it says that was unnecessary. Maybe it ends the conversation. Maybe it refuses to perform. The value does not eliminate anger. It gives anger a better strategy. Suppose someone asks for more than you can give. Emotion, guilt, story. If I say no, I am selfish. Impulse, agree. Value, honesty. What does honesty do? I cannot take that on. No attack, no long defense, no fake enthusiasm. A boundary. The pause lets the value arrive before the old habit closes the deal. At first, the pause will feel unnatural. That is expected. Automatic reactions are efficient because they are familiar. A new response feels slow, it may feel fake, it may feel weak, it may feel socially awkward. This does not mean it is wrong. It means you are interrupting a practiced sequence. Practice changes the speed. The first time you notice after the reaction, the 10th time you notice during. Eventually, sometimes, you notice the first sensation. That is progress. Do not measure self-command by never reacting. Measure it by how early you return. How quickly can you stop adding fuel? How quickly can you apologize? How quickly can you put the phone down? How quickly can you admit, I am not thinking clearly? How quickly can you shift from proving to solving? Recovery time is one of the most honest measures of growth. You may still get angry, but instead of losing a day, you lose 10 minutes. You may still feel rejected, but instead of sending 5 messages, you send none until you understand what you want to say. You may still feel fear, but instead of canceling the opportunity, you prepare. You may still feel shame, but instead of disappearing, you repair. The emotion remains human. The response becomes trained. This is why the pause changes everything. It does not guarantee the right decision. It creates the possibility of one. And sometimes possibility is all freedom needs. Chapter 8. Stop letting other people control your nervous system. Some people do not need access to your bank account to take something valuable from you. They only need access to your attention. One sentence and you think about them for hours. One post and your mood changes. One look and you begin reviewing yourself. One delayed reply and your concentration disappears. One insult and they occupy the room long after they have left it. This is not mystical energy, it is attention, arousal, interpretation, and repetition. The modern world gives other people extraordinary opportunities to enter your internal space. They can reach you while you are eating, working, resting, driving, lying in bed, sitting with someone you love. A person can be physically absent and psychologically present because the device in your hand keeps reopening the interaction. This changes the scale of reactivity. In earlier times, many conflicts had natural boundaries. The conversation ended because people went home. The letter took time. The argument was not automatically archived, forwarded, screenshot, reposted, and discussed by strangers. Today, emotional events can be extended technologically. The trigger does not end. It refreshes. You check for replies. You check whether they viewed the message. You check who liked the post. You check what someone said next. You check whether the number changed. Each check reopens the loop. This is why self-command now requires attention management. If your phone can summon your mind every 2 minutes, your inner life is not fully yours. This does not mean technology is the enemy. The same device connects families, creates businesses, teaches skills, provides maps, records memories, and opens access to knowledge. The issue is access. Who gets it? When? Under what conditions? A home without a door is not more loving. It is less governable. Your attention also needs doors. One of the first doors is notification. Every alert carries an implied message. This deserves your attention now, but now is often a business model, not a fact. Most notifications are not emergencies. They are invitations. The problem is that repeated invitations train response. Sound, check. Red badge, check. Vibration, check. Boredom, check. Discomfort, check. Soon the trigger is internal. No notification is necessary. The mind produces the urge. This is a learned loop. And because the loop is small, people underestimate its effect. But attention is where thought receives fuel. Fragment attention often enough and depth becomes difficult. Fragment depth and difficult work becomes harder. Make difficult work harder, and quick stimulation becomes more attractive. The system reinforces itself. Self-command therefore includes the right to be unavailable, not cruel, not unreachable in emergencies, unavailable. There are times when the world does not get immediate access. Work, sleep, conversation, reading, exercise, thinking, grief, prayer, silence, creative work. If every external demand has equal priority, your priorities do not exist. This principle also applies to provocative people. Some people communicate to solve. Others communicate to extract reaction. You can often tell by what happens when you refuse the emotional frame. A person who wants clarity becomes clearer. A person who wants chaos becomes more provocative. They increase the pressure. They accuse you of not caring. They change the subject. They introduce urgency. They try to make calmness itself offensive. This is important information. Not every invitation to conflict is a responsibility. You are allowed to decline emotional employment. You are not required to attend every argument you are invited to. Suppose someone sends a hostile message at midnight. You feel the demand. Answer now. Why now? Because they chose now. Because their anger sets your schedule. You can read it tomorrow. You can decide whether it deserves a response. You can ask for a call instead of a text battle. You can say, I will discuss the issue, not the insults. You can end access if the pattern continues. This is not avoidance. It is governance of the channel. The same applies to social media. Outrage is commercially efficient because it activates identity. The content is rarely presented as, here is information you may want to consider. It says, people like you must react to this. Identity enters. Now not reacting can feel like betrayal of the group. You share before reading. You attack before verifying. You become emotionally responsible for events selected by a feed optimized to keep you engaged. Again, caring is not the problem. Continuous capture is. There is a difference between being morally awake and being physiologically activated all day. No human being can metabolize the suffering of the entire planet every hour. Constant exposure can create the illusion of participation while reducing the energy available for actual contribution. Self-command asks a difficult question. What deserves my sustained attention? Not what is loudest, not what is newest, not what everyone is arguing about. What deserves it? This is an ethical question because attention is finite. Every hour given to manufactured conflict is an hour unavailable for work, family, study, service, health, creativity, rest, and local responsibility. This is why attention is not merely a productivity issue. It is a life allocation issue. Other people can also control your state through approval. Praise feels better than insult, but it can become another form of dependence. If compliments determine your confidence, their absence will determine your doubt. If public response determines whether your work feels valuable, silence becomes punishment. If being admired becomes necessary, you will begin making decisions for the imagined audience. This is subtle because success can hide it. You may appear powerful while becoming increasingly dependent on response. More likes, more praise, more recognition, more evidence. The threshold moves. The internal system becomes externally calibrated. Self-command does not require rejecting praise. Enjoy it. Say thank you. Let success feel good. But do not convert applause into oxygen. What you cannot breathe without can control you. The same applies to criticism. Some criticism deserves attention. Some contains useful information. Some protects you from blind spots. But not every opinion deserves residency. You need criteria. Does this person know the subject? Do they understand the context? Have they earned influence through character, competence, or relationship? Is there specific information here? Is the criticism aimed at improvement or humiliation? Is there a pattern worth examining? Without criteria, every voice becomes equal, and when every voice is equal, the loudest wins. This is especially dangerous online, where a stranger can speak with total confidence about a life they do not know. You can spend hours defending yourself to someone who invested 12 seconds in misunderstanding you. That is not accountability, it is capture. A useful rule is this: criticism should receive influence in proportion to its quality, relevance, and relationship to reality, not in proportion to its emotional intensity. The loudest comment is not automatically the most important. The harshest sentence is not automatically the truest. The most flattering praise is not automatically the most accurate. Self-command calibrates. This is also true in close relationships. People we love have more legitimate influence. Their feelings matter, their needs matter, their perspective matters. But love does not require total emotional fusion. If your partner is anxious, you can care without becoming anxious. If your parent is disappointed, you can listen without surrendering every adult decision. If your friend is angry, you can take responsibility for your part without accepting every accusation. If someone you love is afraid, you can support them without letting fear make both decisions. This is emotional differentiation. Closeness without collapse. Connection without loss of center. It can feel cold to someone accustomed to enmeshment. If you loved me, you would feel exactly what I feel. But shared emotion is not the only proof of love. Sometimes love is the person who does not panic when you panic. The person who stays grounded enough to help. The person who can hear your anger without becoming cruel. The person who can say no while remaining present. A relationship becomes safer when both people can remain themselves inside connection. Self-command supports that. It reduces the need to control others because you become more capable of surviving their difference. This is one of the deepest benefits of inner authority. When you cannot regulate your own response, you become more tempted to regulate everyone else. Do not say that. Do not wear that. Do not go there. Reply faster. Reassure me again. Agree with me. Stop being upset. Be different so I can feel stable. Control of others often begins where self-tolerance ends. The more capable you become of tolerating uncertainty, disappointment, difference, and temporary discomfort, the less you need other people to organize themselves around your emotions. That is freedom for both sides. One of the hardest access points to close is the need to know what people think of you after you leave the room. This creates a special kind of mental surveillance. You replay the conversation. Did I talk too much? Did that joke land? Was I awkward? Why did they look away? Should I send a follow-up message? The social mind is doing what social minds do, tracking belonging. But the process becomes expensive when every interaction turns into post-production. You are no longer living the conversation. You are editing it after release. Self-command means knowing when review stops being useful. Did I behave according to my values? Is there something specific to repair? Is there information I can use? If the answer is no, the rest may be an attempt to control other people's private interpretations. Those interpretations are not available for direct management. This is especially important for creators, leaders, teachers, and anyone whose work is public. Visibility multiplies opinion. The more people who encounter your work, the more contradictory interpretations will exist. One person thinks you are too quiet. Another thinks you talk too much. One thinks you are too ambitious. Another thinks you lack ambition. One thinks your work is simple. Another thinks it is inaccessible. If you try to satisfy every interpretation, coherence disappears. The solution is not to ignore feedback. It is to decide which feedback belongs in the room where decisions are made. Build an internal board of directors. Whose judgment has earned a seat? Who understands your values? Who knows the work? Who tells you the truth without needing to diminish you? Who can distinguish a mistake from your identity? Who has relevant competence? Not every voice gets a vote. That principle is not arrogance, it is governance. A country does not become more democratic by allowing every passerby to rewrite its constitution every afternoon. Your mind should not either. There is a practical exercise here. Identify 3 people, platforms, or situations that have disproportionate access to your state. Do not immediately cut them off. Observe the mechanism. What do you check? What do you fear? What response are you hoping for? What sentence has too much power? What boundary is missing? What expectation is unspoken? What access can be reduced? Maybe the change is technological. Notifications off, phone outside the bedroom, no checking during focused work, no reading comments before breakfast. Maybe the change is relational. No serious argument by text, no immediate response to insults, no explaining the same boundary 5 times. Maybe the change is internal. No assumption that silence equals rejection, no treating praise as proof, no treating criticism as verdict. Each change closes a door that used to remain permanently open. And here is the paradox. When you stop letting everyone control your state, you often become more available for genuine connection. Why? Because you are no longer constantly defending, proving, monitoring, and anticipating. You can listen. You can choose. You can care without being captured. You can disagree without collapse. You can receive without addiction. You can leave without theater. You can stay without surrender. The point is not to become unreachable. The point is to decide what reaches you deeply. That is a form of inner architecture, and without it, the world will happily furnish your mind for you. Chapter 9. Discipline begins where emotion ends its argument. Discipline is often described as the ability to do what must be done when you do not feel like doing it. That definition is useful, but incomplete. Discipline is also the ability to stop doing what your current state desperately wants when you know the cost will belong to a future version of you. To speak less, to wait, to leave, to stay, to begin, to stop, to go to sleep, to close the app, to keep the promise, to refuse the invitation, to finish the work, to walk away from the argument even though the perfect comeback has just arrived. The drama of discipline is usually imagined as heroic effort. In real life, it often looks boring. You put the phone in another room. You do not buy the thing. You go to the gym without feeling transformed. You answer the email calmly. You stop eating when the food is no longer hunger. You write the page. You keep the boundary. You arrive on time. You tell the truth. You do not reopen the conversation simply because loneliness appeared at 11:47 at night. No audience, no soundtrack, no visible victory. But this is where a life becomes reliable. James Allen wrote from a tradition that linked thought, character, and circumstance through disciplined inner cultivation. Some of his language belongs to his era, and we should not turn philosophy into a claim that every circumstance is personally manufactured. But one idea remains useful. Character is not built in isolated moments of inspiration. It is accumulated through repeated patterns of thought and conduct. That means discipline is not a mood. It is a relationship with future consequences. The impulsive mind discounts the future. The disciplined mind gives the future a vote. This can be felt in almost every form of self-command. You are angry now. The future must live with the sentence. You want relief now. The future must live with the expense. You want comfort now. The future must live with the unfinished work. You want approval now. The future must live with the boundary you abandoned. You want revenge now. The future must live with the escalation. Discipline brings the future into the present decision, not as fear, as representation. The future self cannot physically enter the room and stop you. So present, you must learn to speak on their behalf. What will this choice make easier tomorrow? That question changes behavior because it shifts the scale. Many bad decisions are attractive only at a short distance. Move the camera back and they look different. One night of avoidance looks harmless. Repeated for a year, it becomes a skill not learned. One impulsive purchase looks small. Repeated under stress, it becomes debt. One avoided conversation looks peaceful. Repeated, it becomes resentment. One compromise of a boundary looks kind. Repeated, it becomes a relationship structure. One angry message looks justified. Repeated, it becomes your reputation. Discipline is the ability to see the pattern inside the moment. This is why the phrase "just this once" deserves attention. Sometimes once really is once, but reactive systems love exceptions because exceptions protect the habit from examination. Just this once I will contact them. Just this once I will skip. Just this once I will spend. Just this once I will lie. Just this once I will check. Just this once I will stay silent when I need to speak. The question is not whether exceptions are forbidden. The question is whether once has become the favorite costume of repetition. Self-command becomes stronger when rules are decided outside the emotional moment. This is one of the most practical principles in the book. Do not negotiate every value from the beginning every time you are tempted. Decide some things in advance. If I am angry, I do not send the message immediately. If I am pressured to decide, I ask for time. If I am exhausted, I postpone catastrophic conclusions about my life. If someone repeatedly insults me, I end the conversation. If I receive unexpected money, I wait before spending it. If I feel the urge to quit a long-term goal after one bad day, I give the decision 48 hours. These are not universal rules. They are examples of pre-commitment. A clear mind makes an agreement with a future reactive mind. This reduces the amount of persuasion required in the moment. The disciplined person is not always stronger in the moment. Often they have simply designed the moment better. They removed the app. They automated the payment. They prepared the food. They set the boundary in advance. They made the rule. They told someone the plan. They created friction between impulse and action. This matters because self-command is not a contest of willpower. Environment matters. Fatigue matters. Accessibility matters. Social pressure matters. The easier a behavior is, the more likely it becomes. So make destructive reactions slightly harder. Do not keep the phone beside the bed if nighttime loneliness makes you contact people you regret contacting. Do not store the credit card in every shopping app if stress spending is your pattern. Do not continue arguments in a medium where you become reckless. Do not enter predictable situations without a plan if you know what they trigger. This is not weakness. It is intelligence about your own patterns. A person who knows the bridge becomes icy does not prove courage by refusing to slow down. Knowledge should alter preparation. Discipline also requires learning to tolerate unfinished emotion. This is difficult because action often functions as emotional completion. You send the message and feel relief. You make the purchase and feel relief. You cancel the plan and feel relief. You say yes and feel relief. You attack and feel relief. The immediate reduction in tension reinforces the behavior. Now the mind learns, when this feeling appears, do that. This is how avoidance becomes powerful. If anxiety appears before a presentation and cancelling immediately reduces anxiety, cancellation receives a reward. The next presentation may produce even more fear because the system has learned that escape is the route to relief. Again, this is not an argument for forcing yourself through every fear. Some fears are appropriate. Some situations should be left. The principle is to notice when relief is training the wrong behavior. Ask, what is this relief teaching me? If the relief teaches you that every discomfort must be escaped, your world becomes smaller. If the relief teaches you that every disagreement must be resolved through submission, resentment grows. If the relief teaches you that every moment of boredom requires stimulation, concentration weakens. If the relief teaches you that every lonely night requires reopening a closed relationship, separation never becomes complete. Discipline sometimes means accepting a few minutes of more discomfort to create a future with less captivity. This is why voluntary discomfort has always appeared in traditions of self-mastery. The purpose is not suffering for its own sake. It is learning that discomfort can be experienced without immediate obedience. Sit in silence for 10 minutes without reaching for stimulation. Delay a small pleasure. Have the honest conversation. Do the difficult task before the easy one. Let someone be disappointed by a reasonable boundary. The specific exercise matters less than the lesson. I can feel an urge without becoming its employee. That confidence transfers. You learn that discomfort rises and changes. You learn that you are not required to solve every internal tension immediately. You learn that wanting is survivable. You learn that awkwardness is survivable. You learn that being misunderstood is survivable. You learn that waiting is survivable. This is how discipline expands freedom. People often think discipline reduces freedom because it introduces limits. But the absence of limits can create another form of captivity. If you cannot say no to pleasure, pleasure controls you. If you cannot tolerate boredom, stimulation controls you. If you cannot tolerate disapproval, other people control you. If you cannot tolerate effort, comfort controls you. If you cannot tolerate uncertainty, reassurance controls you. Discipline is not the enemy of freedom. It is the structure that prevents freedom from being sold for immediate relief. There is also discipline of speech. This may be one of the most neglected forms. Words are actions. They alter relationships, they create records, they shape identity. They can clarify, repair, expose, defend, encourage, deceive, humiliate, manipulate, or escalate. The disciplined speaker does not say everything they are capable of saying. They ask what the words are for. This is especially important in conflict. Are you trying to solve to be understood? To set a boundary, to punish, to win? To make the other person hurt enough to validate your own hurt? The purpose determines the language. If the purpose is repair, contempt is expensive. If the purpose is boundary, over-explanation is unnecessary. If the purpose is truth, exaggeration weakens the case. If the purpose is dignity, humiliation is contradictory. This is why restraint can be stronger than eloquence. The perfect insult may demonstrate intelligence. Not using it may demonstrate command. Silence also requires discipline, not defensive silence, not manipulative withdrawal. Intentional silence, the choice not to fill every gap, the choice not to answer every accusation, the choice not to correct every misunderstanding, the choice not to announce every plan, the choice not to respond to provocation, the choice to let results speak where explanation would become performance. This kind of silence can feel dangerous because the ego wants management of perception. If I do not answer, they will think, maybe. And sometimes you need to answer. But the need to control every interpretation is endless. There will always be another mind you cannot manage. Discipline accepts the limit. You say what needs saying, you do what needs doing, then you let reality continue without constant supervision. There is also discipline of attention. What you repeatedly attend to becomes psychologically available. If you spend hours rehearsing outrage, outrage becomes easy to access. If you spend hours comparing, inadequacy becomes easy to access. If you spend hours studying, ideas become easy to access. If you spend hours practicing a skill, the skill becomes more available. Attention is rehearsal. This does not mean attention magically creates external reality. It means attention trains internal readiness. A disciplined person therefore protects what they practice mentally. What do you rehearse all day? Complaints, arguments, possibilities, craft, fear, gratitude, strategy, resentment. The answer becomes part of your default mental environment. Discipline is choosing some rehearsals over others. There is another form of discipline that rarely receives attention: ending. People often celebrate the discipline to begin, wake early, start the project, go to the gym, launch the business. But self-command also requires knowing when enough is enough. Stop working before exhaustion turns into self-neglect. End the conversation when it is no longer productive. Close the screen. Stop explaining. Stop chasing a person who has already answered through behavior. Stop collecting evidence after the conclusion is clear. Beginning requires energy. Ending requires permission. Many reactive patterns continue because a person does not know how to end without emotional certainty. They want to feel completely finished before they stop. But closure is not always a feeling that arrives. Sometimes closure is a decision repeated until the feelings catch up. You may still miss the person and decide not to reopen the relationship. You may still want the argument and decide the conversation is finished. You may still feel uncertain and decide that you have enough information. You may still want another hour of work and decide sleep matters more. Discipline respects thresholds. This protects you from the belief that intensity is automatically productive. More effort is not always better. More explanation is not always clearer. More contact is not always more loving. More punishment is not always more just. A governed life knows both how to engage and how to stop. Finally, discipline requires forgiveness without indulgence. You will break your own rules. You will react. You will send the message. You will say yes when you mean no. You will avoid. You will over-explain. You will lose an afternoon to something that did not deserve it. The undisciplined response to failure is often dramatic. I ruined everything. I am back at the beginning. I have no self-control. Then shame becomes permission to continue. The disciplined response is smaller. That was the old pattern. What happened before it? What will I change next time? Repair what needs repair. Return. Return is discipline, not perfection. A person who returns 1,000 times has built more character than a person who waits for a perfect identity before beginning. You do not need to feel powerful to practice self-command. You need to act according to a decision that deserves more authority than the current mood. This is where emotion ends its argument. It does not disappear, it presents its case. And then something deeper votes. Chapter 10. Become difficult to control. The purpose of self-command is not to become cold. It is not to become unreadable. It is not to become suspicious of everyone. It is not to turn relationships into contests of dominance. And it is not to build such a hard shell that nothing can touch you. A person who cannot be touched is not necessarily free. They may simply be defended. The goal is different. Become difficult to control without becoming difficult to love. That requires a very particular kind of strength. You still care. You still feel. You still attach. You still hope. You still risk disappointment. But the existence of those feelings no longer gives every person, impulse, fear, or circumstance unrestricted access to your behavior. This is mature power. It does not need to announce itself. You can see it in small moments. Someone provokes you. You notice the provocation and decline the script. Someone flatters you. You enjoy it without lowering your standards. Someone is disappointed by your boundary. You allow their disappointment to exist. Someone misunderstands you. You clarify once, perhaps twice, and then stop living inside their interpretation. Fear appears. You prepare instead of fleeing automatically. Anger appears. You extract the information and choose the strategy. Loneliness appears. You seek connection without reopening every closed door. Success appears. You receive it without turning applause into identity. Failure appears. You learn without turning one event into a verdict. This person is not emotionless. This person is governed. There is a difference. To become difficult to control, first become difficult to hurry. Urgency is one of the oldest tools of influence. Decide now, answer now, buy now, agree now, respond now, prove yourself now. The faster the demand, the less room there is for judgment. This is why one of the simplest forms of power is the ability to slow a decision. I will think about it. I will respond tomorrow. I need the details. I am not deciding under pressure. These sentences protect agency. A manipulative environment often treats delay as resistance because delay is resistance. It prevents the emotional frame from becoming the only frame. Become difficult to flatter. This does not mean rejecting praise. It means praise should not purchase access that values would otherwise refuse. People are often careful around insult and careless around admiration, but admiration can disarm judgment. You are the only person who understands me. You are different from everyone else. You deserve more. People like you do not need rules. Flattery can create a special identity, and the desire to preserve that identity can make a person easier to influence. Ask what is being requested after the praise. Does the compliment stand alone, or does it prepare a concession? You do not need cynicism. You need sequence awareness. Become difficult to shame, again, not shameless. Shame can carry moral information. If you violate your values, discomfort can support correction. The goal is to become difficult to control through global humiliation. A manipulative form of shame says, if you loved me, you would. A good person would. Everyone knows you are selfish. You are just like... The message attacks identity so that behavior will follow. A person with self-command can ask, is there a specific responsibility here? If yes, address it. If no, refuse the identity trial. Specific accountability is useful. Global condemnation is often control. I forgot what I promised. I will repair that. Different from, I am a terrible person, so I must now agree to everything you want. The first preserves responsibility. The second destroys boundaries. Become difficult to frighten unnecessarily, not fearless. Fearless people can be reckless. The goal is proportional fear. Ask, what is the actual risk? What evidence exists? What preparation is possible? What part is imagination? What is the cost of avoiding? Fear becomes less controlling when it is made specific. I am afraid this presentation will go badly. Specific. What does badly mean? I forget something, I look nervous, someone asks a question I cannot answer. Now preparation is possible. I am afraid everyone will think I am incompetent. That is larger, less measurable, and harder to solve. Reactive fear likes vague catastrophe. Self-command asks for detail. Detail returns the problem to scale. Become difficult to bait. Provocation works by offering the ego a role. Defender, avenger, corrector, hero, victim, expert. The bait says, prove who you are. If you accept the role, the other person controls the stage. You do not need to prove strength every time strength is questioned. You do not need to prove intelligence every time someone misunderstands. You do not need to prove courage every time someone calls you afraid. You do not need to prove loyalty by violating your judgment. Identity that requires constant proof is easy to manipulate. A stable identity can survive accusation. Become difficult to distract. Attention is behavioral currency. What repeatedly captures attention repeatedly influences state. A person who cannot choose what to ignore will struggle to choose what to build. This is not merely about phones. It is about mental interruption, old conversations, imaginary arguments, comparison, rumors, speculation, the need to know what everyone is doing, the need to monitor how your work is being received, the need to check whether someone has changed their mind. Each can become a small tax. One tax is manageable. 1,000 taxes become a life. Choose what receives repetition. The thing you revisit gains weight, become difficult to recruit into other people's emotional emergencies. This requires compassion with boundaries. Someone else is panicking. You can care. But you do not need to panic in order to prove care. Someone else is angry. You can listen. But you do not need to match anger to prove loyalty. Someone else wants an immediate answer. You can respect urgency without accepting false urgency. Someone else feels rejected by your boundary. You can acknowledge the feeling without removing the boundary. This is one of the hardest forms of relational self-command because humans are social. We are sensitive to group emotion, but two dysregulated people rarely produce better judgment than one. Sometimes the most loving person in the room is the one who does not join the storm. Become difficult to seduce with certainty. This may sound strange. We usually think uncertainty is dangerous. But false certainty can be more controlling because it ends inquiry. This person is the one. This investment cannot fail. This opportunity will solve everything. Everyone is against me. There is no point. I know exactly what they meant. Certainty produces commitment. When the evidence is incomplete, certainty can be a trap. Self-command can tolerate the sentence, "I need more information." That sentence protects you from emotional absolutism. Become difficult to own through resentment. Resentment feels like holding someone accountable in the mind, but prolonged resentment can become another form of attachment. The person remains present. Their action is rehearsed. Their sentence is repeated. Their image becomes a reference point. You may have left them physically while continuing the relationship internally. Releasing resentment does not require pretending the harm was acceptable. It may require consequences. It may require distance. It may require grief. It may require accepting that repair will never come. But self-command asks whether continued mental prosecution is serving your life. At some point, refusal to release can become continued access. Forgiveness is a complex word and should not be demanded, especially in cases of serious harm. But there is a broader form of release available. Deciding that someone will no longer receive daily attention simply because they once caused pain. That is not absolution. It is eviction. Become difficult to own through success. This is rarely discussed because success appears positive, but success can control through identity. You achieve. People praise. A new standard forms. Now you must maintain the image. You cannot admit uncertainty. You cannot slow down. You cannot change direction because people know you for the old direction. You cannot fail publicly. The achievement becomes a cage. Self-command means remembering that success is something that happened, not something you must continuously perform to deserve existence. You are allowed to learn again, to be a beginner, to change, to rest, to choose values over image. Otherwise, the audience becomes another trigger. Become difficult to control through your own past. The past has influence because it provides evidence. I tried before. I failed before. I trusted before. I got hurt before. I always do this. History matters. But history is descriptive, not necessarily legislative. It tells you what happened. It does not automatically determine what must happen next. The more self-command you build, the more carefully you use the word always. Always turns history into identity. I have reacted this way many times is honest. I will always react this way is prophecy disguised as observation. Leave room for training. Leave room for new evidence. Leave room for the version of you that has not yet been rehearsed enough to feel natural. This is where identity becomes practical. A person who wants self-command should stop asking only, "What should I do?" Also ask, "What kind of person am I training through this action?" Every reaction is rehearsal. The angry message rehearses oneself. The pause rehearses another. The automatic yes rehearses oneself. The boundary rehearses another. The avoidance rehearses oneself. The prepared courageous action rehearses another. You are not merely solving moments. You are practicing identities. This is why small decisions matter. Not because every choice is life-changing, because repeated choices teach you what you can expect from yourself. Self-trust is built when your behavior becomes increasingly aligned with your considered values. You say you will leave the argument when it becomes abusive and you leave. You say you will wait before spending, and you wait. You say you will not contact the person during loneliness, and you do not. You say you will speak when a boundary is crossed, and you speak. Each action becomes evidence, not evidence that you are perfect, evidence that you are becoming reliable to yourself. This is a different kind of confidence. It does not need constant positive statements. It is behavioral memory. I have felt this before, and I did not obey it. That sentence is powerful. I have been afraid and still acted. I have been angry and still chosen restraint. I have been lonely and still protected my standards. I have been pressured and still asked for time. I have been criticized and still listened for truth. I have failed and still returned. This is how self-command becomes embodied, not through one revelation, through accumulated proof. At this stage, the title of this book should sound different. If you cannot control this, you will never control your life. What is this? Not your emotions, not your thoughts, not your body, not other people, not circumstances. This is the point at which a temporary internal state attempts to become behavior without examination. The reaction, the transition, the handoff, that is the territory. If you never develop influence there, life remains vulnerable to whatever produces the strongest immediate feeling. The loudest fear chooses, the hottest anger chooses, the deepest insecurity chooses, the quickest pleasure chooses, the most demanding person chooses, the most provocative screen chooses, the most recent wound chooses. But when you learn to govern the handoff, something changes. Fear becomes one voice, anger becomes one voice, desire becomes one voice, history becomes one voice, other people become voices. None is automatically the ruler. You listen, you assess, you choose. This does not make life controllable. It makes you more present inside your own life. That is the highest form of control available, not domination of reality. Participation with authority, and there is an important moral consequence. The more command you have over yourself, the less control you need over other people. You do not need to force agreement, because disagreement does not erase you. You do not need to force reassurance, because uncertainty is survivable. You do not need to force obedience, because boundaries can replace domination. You do not need to punish every disappointment, because disappointment is not annihilation. Inner authority reduces the appetite for outer control. This is one reason true self-command often makes a person gentler, not softer in standards. Gentler in unnecessary force. They can say no without hatred. They can leave without humiliation. They can disagree without contempt. They can be wrong without collapse. They can be right without needing to destroy. They can care without clinging. They can forgive without reopening access. They can protect themselves without turning the world into an enemy. This is strength with proportion, and proportion is one of the clearest signs that a person is no longer being governed by the moment. A proportionate person does not turn one mistake into a life sentence, one disagreement into a war, one rejection into an identity, one success into superiority, one fear into destiny, one impulse into command. They keep things their size. That may be the most practical definition of wisdom in this book. Keep things their size. Feelings are real. Keep them their size. Opinions are information. Keep them their size. Mistakes matter. Keep them their size. Praise feels good. Keep it its size. Fear warns. Keep it its size. The past teaches. Keep it its size. When things remain their size, they stop becoming gods, and you stop becoming their servant. So become difficult to control, not through armor, through awareness, through pause, through boundaries, through attention, through discipline, through the ability to tolerate what you once had to escape, through a self-respect that does not require performance, through values that remain present when emotion becomes loud. Then the world can still affect you, but affecting you is no longer the same as owning your next move. Conclusion. Control this first. At the beginning of this book, we started with 10 seconds. 10 seconds to send the message. 10 seconds to strike back. 10 seconds to agree. 10 seconds to abandon a promise. 10 seconds to let a temporary state choose a permanent consequence. Now those 10 seconds should look different. They are not empty time, they are territory. Inside them live sensation. memory, interpretation, emotion, impulse, identity, and choice. At first, the process may still feel too fast. You will notice after. You will close the conversation and realize what happened. You will look at the message and think, I did it again. You will hear your own explanation and recognize the old pattern underneath it. Do not despise late awareness. Late awareness is the beginning of earlier awareness. Review the sequence. What happened? What did I make it mean? What did I feel? What did the feeling ask me to do? What was I trying to protect? What did the reaction cost? What could I practice next time? That review is not punishment, it is training. Then one day you will notice during. Your voice is already changing, but you hear it. Your hand is already reaching for the phone, but you stop. You are halfway through the old sentence and choose not to finish it. You feel the urge to explain and decide 3 sentences are enough. You recognize that you are tired, not doomed. You notice that the need to win has replaced the original purpose of the conversation. This is progress. Then sometimes you will notice before. A sensation rises. A familiar interpretation approaches. The old impulse becomes visible at the door. And something in you says, I know this pattern. Not with hatred, with recognition. That is the beginning of command. You do not need to control every thought. Thoughts appear. You do not need to control every emotion. Emotions move. You do not need to control every circumstance. Life refuses. You need influence over the handoff, the moment when what you feel attempts to become what you do. Control this first. Control the hand that wants to send the message while angry. Control the mouth that wants relief through cruelty. Control the need to be chosen before it chooses for you. Control the demand for certainty before it invents an answer. Control the reflex to escape every discomfort. Control the habit of letting someone else's opinion become your identity. Control the urge to prove what your life could simply demonstrate. Control the part of you that wants to solve a temporary feeling with a permanent decision. Again, control does not mean violence against yourself. It means stewardship. You are responsible for a powerful system. Your emotions are part of that system. Your memories are part of it. Your instincts are part of it. Your habits are part of it. Your values are part of it. Your reflective mind is part of it. The task is not to let one component declare itself king whenever it becomes loud. This is why the strongest person is not necessarily the one who feels least. It may be the person who can feel deeply without losing authorship. They can love without losing themselves. They can grieve without turning grief into identity. They can be angry without becoming cruel. They can be afraid without automatically retreating. They can desire without becoming owned by desire. They can receive praise without addiction and criticism without collapse. They can live in a world they do not control without abandoning the part they can govern. This was the Stoic insight. This was the practical insight beneath our examination of triggers, shame, status, boundaries, attention, and discipline. The outer world will continue producing events. Some will be beautiful, some unfair, some ordinary, some devastating. Some will change you. Self-command is not a promise that nothing will break through your defenses. There should not be defenses against everything. A life that cannot be moved cannot be loved. The goal is not invulnerability. The goal is recovery with integrity. When you lose your center, return. When you react, repair. When you discover a new trigger, study it. When you make a mistake, keep it specific. When you are uncertain, do not manufacture certainty merely to feel relief. When another person is disappointed, ask whether the disappointment is evidence of wrongdoing or simply the cost of a boundary. When anger is justified, choose a response that serves the value anger is defending. When fear is loud, ask whether it is identifying danger or unfamiliarity. When praise arrives, enjoy it without renting your identity to the audience. When shame appears, separate behavior from worth. When loneliness arrives, choose connection that does not require self-abandonment. When the world tries to hurry you, slow the decision. When someone tries to bait you into proving yourself, remember that stable identity does not need to audition. These are not commandments, they are forms of practice. You will need different forms at different times. There may also be moments when self-guided practice is not enough, when patterns are overwhelming, when safety is at risk, when trauma, addiction, severe distress, or other problems require qualified professional support. Seeking appropriate help is not a failure of self-command. It is often an expression of it, recognizing the limits of one strategy and choosing a better one. Real sovereignty includes reality. It does not pretend that every problem can be solved by will. But within reality, there remains an extraordinary amount of room for practice. One breath, one delayed reply, one honest no. One night before deciding. One walk before speaking. One question before assuming. One apology before pride hardens. One boundary before resentment grows. One return after failure. A life can move through choices this small. There is one final distinction worth carrying with you. Self-command is not self-rejection. You're not trying to become someone who never gets angry because anger embarrasses you. You're not trying to become someone who never needs reassurance because need makes you feel weak. You're not trying to become someone who can be insulted without caring because caring feels dangerous. You are trying to become someone who can include the whole experience without allowing one part of it to govern the whole person. This means the work is not a civil war. Fear is not the enemy. Anger is not the enemy. Desire is not the enemy. The past is not the enemy. Even the old reaction is not the enemy. The old reaction was usually learned for a reason. Maybe it protected you once. Maybe it got attention when direct asking did not. Maybe it reduced fear. Maybe it kept peace. Maybe it helped you survive a particular environment. You can respect the intelligence of adaptation without making adaptation permanent. You can say, I understand why I learned this. I no longer need to obey it in every situation. That is a more stable form of change than hatred. Hatred keeps you in relationship with the pattern. Understanding allows revision, and revision is what this entire book has been about, not becoming a different species, revising the sequence, trigger, pause, interpret, choose, act, review, return. Over time, the sequence becomes less dramatic. The person who once needed an hour to calm down may need 20 minutes. The person who once needed 20 minutes may need one breath. The person who once avoided every hard conversation may still feel fear but speak anyway. The person who once chased reassurance may notice the urge and wait. The person who once confused boundaries with cruelty may learn that a clear no can be kinder than a resentful yes. These changes are rarely cinematic, but they accumulate. One day you realize that a person who once controlled your entire mood no longer has the same access. A situation that once made you panic now makes you pause. A criticism that once became identity now becomes information. A temptation that once felt inevitable now feels familiar. Familiar is powerful. When a pattern becomes familiar, it loses the advantage of surprise. You can see it coming. And what you can see coming, you can prepare to meet. That is how self-command becomes less about heroic resistance and more about practiced recognition. You know your doors. You know your levers. You know your tired version. You know your lonely version. You know the version that wants to prove. You know the version that wants to escape. You do not exile them. You stop handing them the keys. If you have stayed with this book to the end, then you already understand why the work cannot be completed by listening once. The useful test is the next real moment. If you want to continue building this kind of inner authority with us, subscribe and return to the channel whenever you need the next piece of the practice. Not as an escape from life, but as preparation for meeting it more deliberately. The next difficult moment will come, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 10 minutes, a message, a look, a fear, a temptation, a criticism, a silence, a memory. The old reaction will present itself as if it were the only possible response. And for a moment perhaps you will believe it. Then remember, the emotion is real, the impulse is real, the history is real, but none of them has automatic ownership of what happens next. There is a space. Use it. There is a choice. Train it. There is a life on the other side of repeated reactions. Build it. Control this first, and the rest of your life will finally have someone present enough to lead it.